Hello, and welcome to Entangled, the podcast where we explore the science of consciousness, the true nature of reality, and what it means to be a spiritual being having a human experience. Today I'm joined by Chance Gardner, artist and producer of the Magical Egypt series. In this conversation, we discuss pioneer of ancient Egypt research, John Anthony West, and how his book Serpent in the Sky influenced Chance's interest in Egypt. We consider the two models of ancient Egypt and the importance of icons and symbols. We discuss Eastern philosophy as top-down and Western as bottoms-up. Next, we discuss the principle of as above, so below, and the significance of organic geometry. From there, we discuss the netters of Egyptian mythology as principles, not gods. We talk about Edgar Mitchell's kundalini experience returning from the moon and the concept of different planes of self. Chance considers cities as people farms, predicated on us not knowing our true nature. We consider the 128 cities known to the ancient Egyptians serving as deeper organs of perceptions. Chance describes Angkor Wat as the stairway to heaven and how it contains the secrets of kundalini. We discuss devas and asuras and what they tell us about the history of humanity. We then discuss esoteric art and the recurrence of the third eye in Eastern spiritual traditions. From there we talk about white and black magic and differentials in power. We discuss how the meaning of myth has been inverted and consider evil as an interruption to the organizational pattern. We then discuss fraternal orders and ceremonial magic. Chance and I consider where humanity is within the Yuga cycle and reference the three-body problem. Chance discusses mandalas and their impact on brain coherence and how hieroglyphics serve as lessons in syncretism. Next, Chance explains how he first met John Anthony West and got involved in magical Egypt. We talk about the age of the Sphinx and theorize about its missing partner. We discuss the moon voyages and whether the public footage of those events has been edited and censored. Chance describes the hypnagogic realms and how the mind unfurls in higher dimensions. We consider the intersection of Egyptology, intelligence agencies, and the phallus of Osiris. Chance describes anamnesis as the recognition of fundamental truth. We then discuss how Heka differs from our traditional understanding of magic and discuss hierarchies of consciousness. Chance describes how ceremonial magic attracts more nefarious individuals like Michael Aquino, founder of the Temple of Set. We discuss Disneyland and Club 33 and the tradition of human sacrifice. Next, we talk about the relationship between Egypt and Atlantis. Chance describes how the ancient Egyptians used sacred art to record the structure and functioning of consciousness. We end this conversation discussing how the brain is built to work in symbols. This outro is titled How Did the Egyptians Know Consciousness? And begins at episode 81. Outros are available for this and all others at entangledpodcast.substack.com. Music from the show is available on the Spotify playlist Entangled the Vibes. If you like the show, please drop a 5-star review and subscribe on Substack, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. This one is a wild ride, even for my crazy-ass show. Please enjoy the episode.
My name's Chance Gardner. I'm the author, creator, and producer of the Magical Egypt series. I started doing the Magical Egypt series under very strange circumstances. That I had a number of commercial jobs and personal interests that sort of converged in Egypt. When I first started, I was a commercial artist, and I just did typography and print design. Then I began to do animation and 3D animation, and I started working with the defense industry and doing animations and visualizations for weapons and just war stuff, and it wasn't entirely a good karma job. But in addition to that, I would do graphics for video games. And one day while I was doing research for a new game I was designing, I went to the library with a completely open mind. What am I going to use as the artistic, aesthetic basis for this video game? And I went to a local library, and it just hit me. You know what I'll do? Ancient Egypt. At the time, nobody had really done. This is when the very first Indiana Jones movies had come out, and nobody had really taken advantage of how amazing the art direction was in ancient Egypt. And so I went to the library and got a bunch of reference material and started scanning books and getting textures. I don't know how much you know about 3D animation, but I started getting blueprints for buildings and the textures that would be the surfaces of the buildings. And when I do research like this, I'll go get hundreds and hundreds of books, any kind of source material that I can find. And one of the books that I found a bunch of really beautiful pictures of ancient Egypt and these, majestic photographic essays and compilations. And I found this one weird little book, just a little rag, like a little something you'd find at a pornography store. It was this book called Serpent in the Sky. And it wasn't a picture book, and I'm not even sure how it ended up in my collection. But in the middle of this research, it was an all-nighter. I was drinking a bunch of coffee, and I think I had a pretty hard deadline the next morning. And instead of doing my work, I couldn't put this book down, Serpent in the Sky, by this character named John Anthony West. And he was so interesting, but he was so personal. And also, he wrote with a fantastic flair, and he has kind of a fatalistic sense of humor like I do. And John was a scrapper. I've never heard a scientific thing like Egypt be presented in such, I'm at war with this entire institution of Egyptology, and here's why. And just his pages, his prose was so engaging. And then as I started reading the book, the proofs that he put forward about Egypt. So just to explain who John West is and the whole idea that most people might not be aware of, that there are literally two completely different depictions or ideas or models about ancient Egypt. And the more once you start pulling on the thread that unravels the sweater, you realize that there's this one place that there's two entirely different things said about. And depending on which model of Egypt you believe is true or that you see evidence to indicate is true, the whole world is a completely different place. And it really unravels your paradigm the more time you spend with Egypt, trying to hold one model of Egypt up and another model of Egypt. So let me take a brief sidebar. Here in Asia, it's very easy to get great analyses of great thinkers. I picked up this book by Confucius, I don't know why, but I started reading this thing, and the brilliance of this man, when you're approaching a new subject, when you're approaching an argument, certainly when you're approaching a war, you shouldn't enter an argument, you shouldn't enter a conversation unless you can make both sides of the argument equally persuasively. If you don't completely know your enemy's argument, you shouldn't be there in the first place. So I think we know from living in this world that we live in right now, there's a kind of propensity to say, I'm only going to learn one side of an argument. I'm literally not only am I not going to listen, but I'm going to prevent the other side from even speaking. Like, that's a new paradigm somehow. I don't know. When that snuck in there, I certainly wasn't paying attention. Nobody asked me about it, but apparently the new standards for conversation and dialectic are, I'm going to try my best to keep you from presenting a counter argument. But in the old days, when people actually thought correctly, you would really try and understand both models. You would hold two possibly contradictory models up and use them as lenses in your glasses. And you look at the world through each one of these lenses and you see which one is correct. You gather the data based on observable data, and then you apply them to the two models, and you see which one is true. So one of these models of Egypt is a model of linear progress. And it's not just a model of the history of Egypt, but it's really two models of the development of the human timeline, the development of human civilization. So I didn't know this until I started looking into it. And certainly if you're only relying on the things we learned in school, then you might have no idea that there are two completely different, not just ideas about Egypt, but ideas about the development of humankind. One of them, we'll call it the modern materialist model, is that human technology and intelligence and progress and goodness and rightness has in a linear advance throughout history, starting with simple savages, who didn't know how to use the wheel, to us, as my mentor used to say, us with our striped toothpaste and our atom bombs. It was an old quote with John West. These ironic things, us with the Brady Bunch, us with whatever is on TV right now. I don't know, I haven't watched TV in years, but you know what I mean. The other model is the idea that, this idea that just like the sun comes up, sun goes down, spring comes, winter comes, weather gets great, weather gets terrible, there's a sign pattern, a cyclical pattern of rising and falling of human intellect over vastly long periods of time. In the West, we're oblivious to this idea. In the East, of course, it's kind of a hum idea called the yugas, or these cycles of time. And it's an interesting thing. It's almost like as our Milky Way galaxy rotates, we move through areas of greater and lesser electrical conductivity. Possibly, maybe there's something to do with the oxygen density and the nutrition that reaches our brain. But collectively, as a species, we tend to get really smart and then unbelievably dumb and violent. Kind of like your raising and lowering what operational chakra you're working from over these 26,000 year periods. And so in this other model as well, this cyclical thing, all of consciousness has these cycles, waking and sleeping. You have good moods, you have bad moods. But the actual intelligence, the perceptiveness, the way the brain works, and possibly some medium in the air that allows you and I to exchange thoughts without language, that allows the immediate apparentness of whatever is right to just connect. There's at times you can tell in the art and in the architecture and even in literature, humans have just radiated this intelligence. They incorporate these natural physical mathematical constants into architecture. This incredibly beautiful right hemisphere visual language. And it's right hemisphere because it's synaptic and associative language. Our linear language that we use in the West is linear, and it's a left brain phenomenon. It works in hierarchies and it works in a straight line. So if you are a creative, if you're a right brain person, you tend to think in connections and clusters of ideas. That's why when you talk to a right brain person, it's really hard to get them to shut up, and it's really hard to get them to stay on a single line because you're kind of working this spider web or this synaptic branching structure. So you run around on branches when they branch off. Linear people, very organized people, tend to work in hierarchies. People, thuggish people, people who love authority, people who love hierarchies. Hierarchy is a very monkey thing. People are synaptic clusters, animals and brute, ants, the subjugate, very hierarchical. There's that part of us, but there's this higher part of us that doesn't understand ideas and doesn't understand language in this simple, linear, one-dimensional way. We understand language. We understand ideas, we understand concepts in the way that Egyptians sent symbols. And it really is the difference between information and wisdom. So an interesting allegory about that is one of the uniquely American forms of literature is the detective novel. A detective shows up, and he might have a notebook and a bunch of data points. Jordan was here this day. He's wearing the Egyptian ankh. He has brown hair. He looked a little suspicious, whatever. And I have these, and also there's other people in the room, and I don't know who is associated with who. So the detective shows up, and all he has is data points, but he has no wisdom. Over the course of the novel, you start associating. You do timelines. You start so that nothing is isolated. That's very important for a conversation later. Nothing is isolated. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Data points and linear information don't exist anywhere in the real world. It's an incredibly artificial thing to isolate one fact and hold it in a vacuum against everything else. So what the investigator is doing when he shows up on a case is he's taking information out of the left brain where it's just information, and he's putting it to the right brain where it becomes wisdom. So when we say symbols, when we say hieroglyphs, when we say icons, as a graphic designer, I was raised with icons and these pictures that mean things. So one generation before me, not so much. You had the icon of the stop sign. You had a couple of icons, but once the computer came in, we really recovered this facility of right brain use of symbols. And even the way the symbols work on a computer, a symbol means this is a window to a collection of things that are all related under the umbrella of the symbol. So all of Western culture, this materialist, reductionist culture that we live in, and by the way, when I say materialist, there are two models of the universe that are the very most important thing of all. There's an Eastern model, which is called a top-down model, and there's a Western model, which is a bottom-up model. In the Western model that we're most comfortable with, if you ask people like Daniel Dennett or Richard Dawkins, or most of the gentlemen at Oxford about the nature of the universe, they will claim that the universe is entirely material. They claim with this evil, horrible glee that all there is matter, and that your experience of consciousness is a subjective kind of trick that's played on you through these synaptic reactions. And they will say your need to protect yourself from predators and to understand stimuli and whatnot is so complex that your brain is giving you the illusion that you have this inner voice and this distinct personality and whatnot. And that everything's dead, and that there is no God, and that the universe is an idiot. And this is the thinking from which allopathic medicine comes. in medicine even, because every machine needs maintenance. There's two schools of medicine. There's holistic and the other one I just said. And the allopathic medicine as opposed to homeopathic medicine. Allopathic is very interventionist. Allopathic means nature's stupid. We're going to dominate it with technology. We're going to make it our bitch. We're going to make it do things it doesn't want to do. And that's a very, colonial Western dominating way of thinking. The other way of approaching so first of all, in allopathic medicine, we get these brilliant things like, well, we don't know what the appendix is for, so we're just going to cut it out preemptively. We're just in there anyway. We're going to cut that fucker out of there because we don't know what it does, so it obviously doesn't do anything because we're smarter than the universe. And things like that. When I was young, my whole young life was in advertising, so I was a fanatical student of historical advertising. When I was young, when my mother was pregnant, in fact, you would watch TV, and this guy who played Marcus Welby in the 40s played a doctor on TV. Clearly was just an actor, not a doctor, but he would come on and say, probably not a good idea that you smoke, but if you absolutely have to smoke when you're pregnant, 4 out of 5 doctors recommend Camel cigarettes for the mother, and the baby will thank you too. That kind of thing. We know better. The universe is an idiot. We're going to intervene and fix things. And then the other model is interesting, unless you live in the East, and then it's the most ho-hum idea that there is, that all there is consciousness. So in one model, there is no consciousness, and consciousness is this thing that we think we're experiencing, but we're not actually. In the Eastern model, which is called the top-down model, all there is consciousness, and that matter is a substrate. Matter has devolved, they say, by light slowing down. I don't really understand that, but all there is consciousness. Consciousness provides this template and this organizational structure, and then somehow through vibrations and through hierarchies, my friend Rupert Sheldrake talks about this a lot, consciousness itself organizes into various structures and different biologies, and there's this kind of suggestion that everything is one thing. Like, I'm not a Western Christian. I don't really espouse any denomination, but like Buzz Armstrong, and there's a couple of really hip people. I got to interact with some of the astronauts a while back. Edgar Mitchell, who used to run IONS, hired me, and LeVar Burton. I don't know if you know Star Trek. LeVar Burton, who was Geordi on Star Trek. He was one of my favorite people in the world. Edgar Mitchell hired LeVar and myself and Olivia Barnum and some other people to make this documentary, and it really gave me an opportunity to interact with him briefly. And even the astronauts, if you're an astronaut, you're an incredibly educated person, you're an incredibly intelligent person, you're tough as nails, your body is a punching bag, but incredibly smart people. And they all really we're working in service of this idea that everything is conscious. The more we understand about consciousness and the more we understand about how our minds are resonant with the consciousness of the big thing, suddenly, it's a very different way of looking at things, but all of these other things start coming out of the comparison of these two models. In the materialist model, you have to downplay certain things about human consciousness, because very quickly your materialist model falls apart when you start trying to explain why would something be funny and not funny. Why would I fall in love with somebody? Why would I fall in love with a woman who's less attractive than a really attractive woman because I like her personality better? Why am I attracted to flowers when I have virtually no chemical reason for being interested in flowers? So for me, through humor and aesthetics, our appreciation, our relationship with aesthetics, I see a lot of evidence to indicate that this is a conscious machine, and that when you start looking at the universe through this other model, suddenly ancient Egypt, that doesn't make sense in the materialist model, and it's just a bunch of nonsense when you translate it through that filter, it is literally gibberish. I don't know if you've ever actually picked up a Budge book and tried to read it, but all of these people for all these years have been calling themselves Egyptologists, and they've been happy with this absolute first-grade gibberish that is supposed to have been what the Egyptians were talking about. But then other people come along, and so there was a gentleman, René Schwaller de Lubicz, back in the there's a huge movement of occultism and reappreciation of times in the past where occultism was really lofty. And in the 1800s, this happened. Interestingly enough, every time a major war comes and wipes everybody out and makes it start over again, it seems to happen after a period of really flowering occult awareness. Like, there's a puzzle that we're not supposed to know. And as soon as somebody figures it out, it's like, all right, wipe everybody out, start over again. Let's run the program again, see how long it takes them to figure it out this time. So, interesting enough, right before the last bunch of wars wiped everybody out, occultism and the appreciation of symbols and appreciation of how smart the ancients were was very common knowledge. And then the wars happened and wiped it all out. And then after the wars, the education system was restructured, and things like occultism and folk magic and paganism were really either completely taken out of school books or turned in this light where you're an idiot if you believe them, and it's a primitive, colloquial way of thinking. And so with this kind of pin stroke at one point in American history or in Western history, we absolutely, Plato did this, by the way, this is a whole other conversation, but we leaped over the entire Eastern influence, the entire universe's mind idea, and just landed on this, nope, nothing exists, everything is an illusion, we're just a bunch of rocks and billiard balls, and we're entirely mechanical. And so in one model, we are in resonance with this living thing. So the reason I bring up the astronauts and stuff, there's some really, really cool non-denominational people who are able to talk about this thing called the universe. In the old days, they used to call it the monad, the one thing. So lately, jump in here if I'm sorry to do a diatribe at you, but the one thing is this consciousness, and it's organizational, and it's alive, and it works. You've heard that thing, as above, so below. So you are a conscious entity. You are a city. There's as many cells in you as there are people on Earth. There's whatever, like 10, 12 billion cells. I learned all this through working with Edgar Mitchell and ions. And I'll just get to the punchline before I belabor this. The universe is a conscious thing. The universe is a living thing. We know from occultism and esotericism that as long as people have been around, they have this thing, as above, so below, and different people come up and swing the bat, and they get it wildly wrong. And some people get it just right, that there's only a few actual laws of physics, and the universe keeps repeating them, and it repeats them on the macro scale, it repeats them on the micro scale. So as a graphic designer, I first became aware of this through the organic geometry, the Fibonacci spiral. So if you know about a Fibonacci spiral, the snail shells and universes and things of giant scale and things of extremely small scale all behave according to these few simple rules. Egypt, when we project back on them that they had a religion and they had gods, no point in Egypt has anybody ever said the word God. They always use the word netter, which actually means principles. And the more time I spend studying Egypt, what Middle Ages Victorian Englishmen projected back on Egypt as a religion was actually this really robust science. And part of the reason we're having trouble understanding it as a science now is that it acknowledges the conscious living nature of the universe, the biological, organic nature of the universe. It recognizes the importance of consciousness as the pattern of everything. But most importantly, this interesting role, it just came into my head, and I'm struggling to articulate it correctly, but you know how right now you are a universe for yourselves. Edgar Mitchell told me this. Edgar Mitchell in space, when he was coming back through the belts, through the shifting magnetic fields, had a kundalini experience. He didn't know what it was. He didn't even know the word at the time, but he wrote it all down. It was a classic kundalini experience. One of the things that happened to him during this time is he became aware of the sentience of every one of his cells. He realized every goddamn one of his cells was alive. It had a job. It had a girlfriend. It had hopes. It had dreams. It had aspirations. It went about its business, did its business, poured a little cocaine on it. It gets excited, sugar, alcohol, falls asleep. It fights with its neighbors. It will join hands with its neighbors when you cut itself, when you cut them. It's alive. It produces offspring for itself. It attacks invaders and things that are going to mess up the local program, the order with which the cell structure. Invaders are called cancer, and they introduce new structural instructions to the organism. So Here's what I'm getting to. It's kind of an interesting thing. You, maybe not, will have a child one day. There's going to be a big bang. There's going to be a little universe. That universe is going to start expanding. All of us are not three-dimensional beings. We're four-dimensional, where we're three-dimensional plus this dimension of growth over time. We all expand over time like the universe is. So you think about the fact that I am a universe. I am going to find another universe and mate with it, and I'm going to produce a third universe. That universe is going to expand, and all the individual cells in that universe are going to look up at this giant structure that is conscious. It might not actually hear the words of a cell, but every time you itch, every time you have a pain, every time you anything, it's a cell praying to you, talking to you. And you are benevolent towards it, because if you put your hand on a fire, you're going to pull it away. You have this basic benevolence, and you want the best for your cells. If you think about that, your relationship to your individual cells is kind of what early people were stumbling towards in these really kind of oafish, oversimplified religious paradigms. When you get back before that, it was a much more Eastern scientific, if you know the word the Tao isn't a religion. The Tao just means the way or the pattern or the order. It's very almost identical to Maat, the M-A-A-T, the order and the rules and the structure of the universe, which happens to be the structure of mind. And if the universe is in fact a giant mind, and you are not a little mind, your mind might be vast, Jordan, but you're a holographic cell of this larger thing. So we participate in this greater consciousness, but also we're kind of like a projector in front of a light. So the universe and primeval consciousness, the consciousness, shines from behind you. You're a little piece of film in front of the light that is your personality and your experience. But you're not the light. You're not generating the light. You're just coloring the light in this unique disturbance pattern for you forward. So kundalini and esotericism and a lot of these methods of understanding what consciousness is and what the universe is involves for a minute understanding and separating the planes of self, so that the personality and the superficial things that you were taught in school, all the artificial modifications that were made of you, the factory turned you out pretty goddamn perfect. And then people have never stopped trying to fix you. Let's get that appendix out of there. Let's shut down your sexual instincts. Let's make you feel horrible about being white and male. Let's whatever, all of these things to try and subvert this basic code. Let's make you distrust others, or whatever. All of school, in my opinion, seems to be this artificial construct that goes on after this original beautiful thing that you were done. So kundalini is one of those ways of returning to your factory defaults. And to just understand, yoga, the same thing. Kundalini really is the ultimate aim of yoga for people who aren't clear on that. So when you can learn that you are layers of yourself, and the deepest layers are this pure, beautiful, all-knowing consciousness outside of time, then you, as a creative, this is kind of where I'm coming to, that either as a religious person or as a creative, or anything, any scientist or anybody is potentially a creative. When you understand that there's different kinds of relationships you can have with this conscious structure that you live in, which you could call the monad, you could call the all, you could call it the intelligent fabric of the universe, then you realize that in these moments where you seem to know what's going to happen before it happens, when you have a love at first sight experience, when you walk into a puzzle, I have this weird thing where it started because I spent my whole life writing advertising. And I got to this point where there's lots of different voices in my head, but there was this one that was really quiet, kept to itself at the back, and sometimes under the right circumstances, I would hear a problem, and instantly before the sentence was done, I'd know the answer. It wasn't me, it was this voice in my head that I wanted to listen to. I've started suspecting that one of our hemispheres isn't necessarily going the same direction in time that the other one is, but there are all these indications that the mind itself is greater than 3D. Part of the materialist paradigm necessitates really putting us in consciousness in a box. So I can put your body in a cage because your body is pretty 3D. Your body's bound to 3D. What I feel like part of the reason for such a tight control on the education system and what ideas can be used as common currency in the Western culture, anything that suggests that your brain is beyond the limitations of matter, that your brain is greater than 3D, which of course it is. It's a different thing. It's not connected. It's not really participating. It's sort of, you've heard that, the band Radiohead. If you get this idea that consciousness isn't just this byproduct that's happening in your brain and not entirely localized to your brain, suddenly you realize there's not really any physical place in your body where consciousness happens, but that your brain acts as sort of a radio. And all those things that people say when they try and dispute this idea that under anesthesia, your brain stops working. And it's the same when you take a crystal out of the radio. There's lots of things you can do to your brain to stop receiving this signal. But the idea that this Western kind of, I'd like to introduce the idea of people farms, that cities are people farms. They're not there to keep us safe. They're there to live off of the aggregate produce that we create. And so when you have a farm of any kind, if you have chickens or if you have anything subjugated, you don't want them to know enough to be able to fly away or to get off the farm. So much of public life involves threats to the physical body, martial coercion and whatnot. And were we to discover that only parts of us are able to be trapped, only parts of us are able to be hurt, we become ungovernable. And also that our best ideas do not come from the outside, they come from the inside. So if you look at our society, all of our society is really set up to prevent you from ever having the thought that you're really a bigger than a 3D person. You don't necessarily need to participate in linear time going backward to forward. And what all this is bringing me to is there's a magic mirror that tells you something about yourself. And all of society is predicated on you never finding this out. I'm watching Three Body Problem right now, which is killing me because it's the exact same story. Something much smarter than us that is going to fuck us up, it's going to stomp us, doesn't want us progressing to the point where we discover this basic fact that will make us unstoppable. I don't know if you've seen Three Body Problem yet, but my God. Please read the book if you can, if you're one of those people. It was so smart. And it's an allegory, kind of, I don't know if it's an intentional allegory, but it's exactly an allegory of the world we live in, that there's something so important that someone is trying to keep us from discovering. And in this society that is a people farm that's predicated on us not really understanding our true nature, it's no wonder that everyone's saying, oh, you're an idiot if you're not a materialist. Everyone's saying, don't pay attention to Egypt. There's nothing there that's worth paying attention to. There are a bunch of superstitious savages. The Catholic Church. I don't know if you've ever been to Rome or if you've ever seen the Vatican, but man, God must love gold. There is so much money in being the guy who tells everyone what to think. And of these people that make money based on us not knowing about ourselves, that make money based on our basic ability to be frightened and captured and deluded. All of this predicates on us not knowing this thing about ourselves. So now, put a pin in that. This is all one cluster, and at the end we can talk about it. Thank you for humoring me, for being patient. I go over to this place. It's like flying to Vegas from where I live right now. It's a little place called Angkor Wat. It's this temple that is, it was bigger than London in the 1400s. You think of it as a temple, but it's this sprawling structure. There's a man-made lake that's a perfect square that you can see from space. It's so big. It's exactly the same problem as Egypt, that it is this massive structure. It was obviously created and art directed by somebody that could see material, but also see the ethereal plane, because all the artwork is that luminous ethereal fire that comes off. Have you ever had like mushrooms or really strong LSD and suddenly you become aware of the aura? Like you can see life force flaming off of somebody when you have a snootful, as they say. Your hemispheres unify, by the way. Just the most recent Berkeley brain modeling, not Sims, but monitoring the brain while you're on LSD, show that you enter this third type of consciousness because your hemispheres, instead of two separate warring things like Republicans and Democrats on either side of the aisle, it becomes one thing. And you have all these new suite of perceptive tools, which is something I want to get to. We have all of these 128 sidhis, or organs of perception, where in the Western world, we're muzzled and trained to think that we only have 7. And so I go to Angkor Wat. I'm shooting, and I just go as a cameraman, graphic designer, and I just love it. Got a new lens, I'm playing with depth of field, and I'm just shooting things. Oh, that's a snake. That's cool. I love snakes. And the first time I went, I did not know what I was shooting. Accidentally or intuitively, I end up shooting this whole series of vignettes and statues. And I come home and I do a little research, and it's like, oh my God, Angkor Wat is this giant 3D manual for kundalini. And it tells this story. And so not only is it this visual depiction, so there's a bridge, and you have the certain number of vertebrae up your spine. That's how many statues there are along this bridge. The bridge goes from the regular world to the temple, which is considered heaven. The temple is elevated space, like in a Masonic lodge. So you're leaving the physical plane when you walk into a lodge. In Angkor Wat, you walk over this bridge that is the spine. So you are actually the kundalini passing up the spine, the stairway to heaven. If you're one generation earlier, are you a Zeppelin fan? You like your Zeppelin?
I know some Stairway to Heaven. Hell yeah.
So there's stairway to heaven. Your 33 steps of your stairway to heaven is enacted in Angkor Wat. And so there's all these things that I started noticing. My God, this is everything that I've been trying to extract from Egypt. And Egypt is so tight-lipped and enigmatic, So I was thrilled at the idea that there was this place that freely gave away all these secrets of Kundalini. But the most important thing there that I didn't realize at the time was that all of Angkor Wat tells this story. And it's a story about the devas and the asuras. So the asuras are demons. The devas are angels. They're geniuses, but they're magical beings with these incredible magical powers. So in the natural order of things, the devas are above the asuras, except the devas are pure and noble. The asuras, as demons, are happy to lie. They love to lie. They love to distort the truth. And in fact, one of their magical powers is distorting the truth. The devas enact a magic spell. I'm sorry, the asuras, the bad guys, enact a magic spell that causes the devas to forget who they are. They fall into a magical sleep. This is also, so our innate magical ability, our innate genius, well, it's not making it about us yet, the devas fell asleep to who they were. The asuras, all they had to do was create a society that perpetuated their idea that you are the slave class. They were subjugated. As soon as they were spelled and overcome and they forgot about their magic power, the bad guys, the asuras, the demons, subjugated them, took them as slaves, and then started profiting off of their labor, which was a model I think you'll find familiar. And so Shiva, the great god Shiva, shows up and sees that this is a perversion of the natural order of things. Shiva is a really interesting personage in this because Shiva is always depicted at the top of this pole. He's sitting at the top of the pole, and he's a god above the other gods, the other warring gods. Shiva suggests this collaboration between good and bad, and he's playing the long game. What he's really trying to do is steal this elixir of immortality from the asuras to give it back to the devas, so that the devas will wake up and remember who they were. So in this whole thing, if you look at the murals of the devas and the asuras and the position and the identity of Shiva, it's this same blueprint that we see in esoteric art from around the world, that you have a third voice, different from your hemispheres, seems to exist in the area of your diencephalon, or the third eye, which every Eastern culture holds in great reverence. That is a higher voice that can remind you of the order of things, and through the agency, the good and the bad, which is also an allegory for sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, or the Ida and the Pingala as it raises up the Sushumna, the collaboration of sympathetic and parasympathetic. This is also the crook and flail in Egypt, parasympathetic. One pulls close and one projects away. It's all these clever symbolic ways of suggesting yang, proactive, or sending, radiating, versus the yin, which is pulling in or accepting, or like condensation on a glass. Gravity is very yang. Radiation is yang, right? So through the cooperation of yin and yang in our systems, through the cooperation of Ida and Pingala, we return this magic, the elixir of life, which is also an allegory for semen retention and the accumulation of spiritual energy, which is a very Hindu, Buddhist thing. And so in this legend, Shiva causes this collaboration. They use as a tug of war this giant snake called Vasuki, the king of snakes, which is a overt kundalini reference because he has 7 heads, the 7 chakras connected by the spine. So there's this entire story there told in metaphor and the beautiful, iconic representations of devas and asuras in this eternal tug of war. And it's a magic mirror. It's a schematic of you, and it's a schematic on every level, including the psychic level where you've been psychically compromised. You've had your divinity stolen. And it wasn't that you had your magic stolen. You had your identity stolen. This is the most important thing of all, because it's not like your arms and legs were cut off. It was just that you were convinced you don't have arms and legs. And so Venice and I were driving home from Bangkok the other day. And she's been just fanatic about this crazy character, Ingo Swann, who was part of the remote viewing program and stuff. Ingo wrote this book called Powerology, where he laid this whole Devas and Asuras story out and really showed that, I already was getting chills from how real this allegory was. But he showed that through language, through the way the dictionary changes, through the way society changes, the way education changes, the only game in town has ever been power. And, white magic would be personal power for protection. Black magic would be power over others. Our entire society is structured to constantly maximize the differential in power between those with power and those without. And if you have power, and if you let a bunch of other people have power, then you don't really have that much power. So an important part of power is maintaining the differential of power. Education, knowledge of yourself, the knowledge of your lore, the knowledge of what you are is one of the most powerful things in the world. So everyone from Orwell to Machiavelli has always said, if you want to subjugate a people, if you want to destroy them and subjugate them, turn them into slaves, the most important thing to do, and really the only thing you have to do, is kill their sense of identity, which means killing their connection to the past, killing their understanding of what they are. So I talk about this like you grew up and you had this old car in the backyard, but you don't have any owner's manual for it, and you think it's a car, but you didn't realize that it's also a levitation machine and it's a time machine, but you have no idea that it can do those things because you don't have a owner's manual. And someone who doesn't want you to succeed in life is keeping that owner's manual for you, so you never become, you ever notice that we still are trapped on the ground, we can't levitate?
And that was something I wanted to ask you about. More so than in past seasons, I feel like you explored the influence of the occult. And that's something that a conclusion I've also come to in my research, right, is that to your point about white and dark magic, I think that there's almost certainly powerful elements who understand the power of dark magic, to your point, and because of that, they have suppressed the knowledge of white magic from the rest of us and made us believe that magic itself is nonsense.
Yeah, while they use it, while they hoard it and use it.
Yeah, so I guess my question for you is, how do you think about that influence of, call it evil, call it whatever the dark counterbalance to the good is, right? And that clearly traces back to even ancient Egyptian history. Who knows exactly how far back, but there is kind of there are these darker connotations of Egyptian ritual magic, and there's a darker side to Isis and Osiris and all of that. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts as to how that counterbalance of dark magic has influenced our history and our present.
The more I learn, the more I realize that everything that we know isn't necessarily because it's true, that part of our society involves projecting things backwards onto the past. So if you really hold that metric up, a lot of what we were raised to believe was evil, was dark, and was black, no more so than a hammer. But if I am, let's just say, for instance, I'm the Pope, or I'm somebody who's in a stream of a lot of money that comes from maintaining this certain belief structure, and a la the rules of powerology, magic, if it is true, really is one of the ultimately empowering things that there are. So one of the tremendous gifts that the Vatican has given humanity over the years is taking a tarred brush covered in ants and painting over the symbolism of the snake. We were raised to believe snakes are evil, they're horrible, they symbolize everything that's bad. And it's sort of like somebody in America saying the metric system is evil, and somebody in Japan saying it's just competing systems will shit on their competitors. And so human intentions are human intentions. I can take a hammer, I can take whatever. The whole idea, the word religion is such a disempowering piece of magic. You know, when people say myth, it's a funny new thing that when people get in fights, when youngsters get in fights, they say to each other, that's a myth. Because people don't even understand that the word myth used to mean this ultimate truth. And at some point, that actual word got migrated to mean the opposite of what it actually means. So when people say, oh, that's a myth, they think that means it's a lie. So you can even see how in our lifetime, language has been shifted. And so nothing in the universe changed. It's our perception of things. We were taught, oh my God, when I see that drinking fountain, that's pure poison. Stay away from that. It's not any comment on reality. It's what you and I have been taught in this Western paradigm. And so there's a lot of things that we were pre-programmed. I was raised in a Christian household. And when I was young, I'd go to these Bible meetings. This is how I became interested in rock and roll. As a young kid, there were these really intellectually truncated adults that would try and lie to me. And even as a kid, I know when people are lying. I was born in Las Vegas, and I used to walk through the casinos as a kid, and I'd see these murderers and pit bosses, and I could just look in their eyes. The weird city I had as a kid, I can tell your sins from looking at your face. If you're a killer or something, it's easy to tell when someone's killed from looking at their face. I would walk through these monsters as a kid, and then we moved to Oregon, or some sleepy little happy land. And these adults would presume to tell me, you know, the way the world works. And they tell me these stories about rock and roll. And they would tell me stories about Janis Joplin and Jimmy Page and how they were consorting with demons and devils. And if you play this one track, you can actually hear Satan's voice. And it was so nonsensical, but it was also cool. And it sent me off on this, like, oh my God, I can't wait to get old and be a satanic rock and roll artist. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. And it wasn't that that was actually the case. It was just that really kind of simple, primitive people doing their best, using the only tool they have is lying and abusing your trust in them as an authority to teach you a bunch of wrong shit and to create this structurally unsound castle in your head. And so a lot of what I'm taking way too long to answer your questions. To your question, is there evil in the world? Is there, I tend to look at the universe in that biological metaphor that I told you, that there's an ultimate benevolence, and when you're constructive, it's rewarded. When you're warring with other cells, that's a state of cancer, it's a state of AIDS. There's a very similar thing happening to AIDS, where every new generation has been weaponized against its host, which is pretty much what AIDS is. The white blood cells turn on the host. So there are these moments of sickness where the structure wars against itself. And then there's other moments of unified, productive moves forward. And then there's sometimes, when you fall in love, you don't age, like during those 3 or 4 first days where you're actually 100% in love with someone. You don't age. You're timeless. There's these just amazing physical, magnetic, electromagnetic phenomena that happen that seem to be affecting time, and that all of these things based on your state of mind. But to answer your question, the same devas and asuras and powerology, it's not that your arms and legs are gone, it's that you were taught that they don't exist. It's not like your voice is evil. You were taught, keep your mouth shut because it annoys me. And I'm going to tell you it's evil because you are interfering with the power structure. There are certainly mean, low karma aspects. If you understand the chakras, the progression of chakras, and they're really a progression of centers of motivation. And there's really good reason to kill a snake when it comes into your house. A fox walks into your chicken hen. There's a really good reason to behave from your lowest chakra and pick up a hammer and sort the problem out. So the lowest chakra is just survival. The one upper is reproduction. The stomach, bifurcated chakras, us versus them, nationality, or in the Egyptian way, it's me versus my brother, but me and my brother versus my neighbor. Me, my brother, my neighbor versus the guys in the next city. All of us against the guys in the next state. So there's these organizational preferential relationships. The idea of actual evil certainly exists in the psyche in disharmony. If you listen to music or if you look at aesthetics, there's colors that don't go with one another. There's notes that are discordant. So I would say evil is a interruption in the organizational pattern. Evil is a cessation of moving towards constructive growth. But if you just look at it as everyone has tools, everyone has an intellect, and instead, some people decide to turn it on others to suppress them. Other people say, I don't want to be around people. I'm just going to see how far I can gallop. I'm going to see how far I can take this one talent I have, and how far can I push it. So depending on what game you want to choose, depending on where your sights are set, it's a very semantic thing to talk about evil. Are there evil entities? Are there demons? Are there things like that? Certainly, if you've eaten LSD or if you've done any ritual ancestor worship. I used to talk to Edgar Mitchell about aliens, and he was like, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff out there, but, try and have a hamburger, try and buy a beer for one. It's like, there's all kinds of stuff in the ocean. What good does it do you? You're never going to talk to it. You're never going to understand what it is. But we've spent, my friend Lon was the outer head of the OTO for a while, and we definitely spent a good bit of time. I've done a good bit of lodge work and a lot of fraternal, occult organization work. And it's cool, and you meet some real malevolent people who, have this idea that they're in a movie and that they're a dark wizard. And some people, they're certainly there. I've eaten enough mushrooms I've had, I don't want to say intercourse, I've had social interaction with so many disincarnate bodies. And they're just like people. Some of them are horrible and some of them are good. Can't really do anything to you unless you voluntarily participate and act on their behalf. So, very complicated world, just like the real world. And there's lots of opportunity for good and bad and opportunity for constructive action. That was a lot of words without ever coming to a conclusion. I'm sorry about that.
So I guess the question I was asking was originally around, where do you think we are in that yuga cycle? So it sounds like maybe you're a little bit more pessimistic now than you used to be.
For a long time, I bought onto the idea that we're coming out of Dwapara and on the rise. Well, first of all, the idea that there couldn't be multiple cycles, like there's something about technology that's on the rise. I was sitting with Robert Bauval. I don't know if you know who Bauval is, but I was sitting with Bauval one time in Egypt. And he told me the story about Thoth and the first time Thoth, God, gave writing to mankind. Oh my God, that's the manly Thoth. George Knapp. Good on you, my friend. Good one. Thoth, I forget if it was Thoth that accepted language and knew, but anyway, what the point was, every artificial augmentation diminishes us. I was in school when when I was young in school, and I was I went to a private school, and I started doing pre-calculus pretty early. And suddenly these cool Tandy computers became available. It's like 1971, 1972. And all the good teachers were like, look, you are diminishing something in yourself when you start using mechanics to augment you. If you saw Forrest Gump, remember Forrest Gump had, or whatever, you use a cane your whole life and suddenly your bones are thin. You write things down all the time, you diminish your memory. And so there's a give and take, and every time we externalize a feature or a function, we lose that innate sense. And so you have to be careful about every kind of technology, and every technology is a double-edged sword. Every technology is a trap and an addictive opiate. And one of the greatest things of all about the esoteric traditions as a magic mirror is that they show you, here's the things that you have as innate tools, and possibly suggest that if it isn't something that you have an innate tool for, you might be wasting your time pursuing it in the first place. I'm going to try very hard to answer your question in ways that don't help. And if you don't answer your question, by the way, keep asking me, because sometimes I'll just drift and then lose the point.
No worries. It's where do you think we are in the yuga cycle?
That's what it was. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think we've got a long way to go. I think we might be on the precipice of a deep fall. If it depends on who wins. I go to Cambodia all the time, and I'm sitting in a restaurant in Cambodia with Venice, and I'm looking around going, what a young, hip place. Everyone here is so young and cool. And then I remember, oh my God, the reason that everyone's so young is that everyone our age died in one massive wipeout, this Maoist revolution wipeout. The pendulum swings back and forth all the time, but there's sometimes where the pendulum goes here and then it goes gink and the whole system breaks. I feel like depending on which way that pendulum goes, if the pendulum breaks in this direction of fascism and language control and thought control, we might be on the precipice of 100,000-year new Reich where surveillance has gotten so intimate that they know your thoughts. This is why you should read The Three Body Problem. How do you survive and thrive in the face of an omniscient enemy? Pretty daunting. And, all the universe is a food chain. There's always someone smarter and that exists in higher dimensions than us. So as humanity grows up in this book, we have to start developing operating systems for dealing with much smarter, much higher things. And this is directly in line with that whole ethical situation that sometimes you keep your head down. Like maybe there's a reason why you're not supposed to practice occultism and magic, that as we go through certain neighborhoods, the underlying principle of, or the cool governing idea of the three body problem is this thing called the dark forest theory. That is like if you're in the dark forest and it's full of predators and you're a little baby crying out in the night, what you're really saying is, hey, I'm here, come and eat me. Free delicious steak, here, come and eat me. So the Fermi paradox is like we look in the night sky and why are we not seeing aliens and UFOs and hearing radio broadcasts and everything? One possible explanation for that is the dark forest theory, that the universe is so full of predators that nobody with any intelligence announces their presence. So we are literally the baby in the woods broadcasting, please come and eat us, please come and subjugate us. Depending on how that goes, and it does seem, I hate that ancient alien stuff. They've stole so much from magical Egypt. They've stole so much from everybody in magical Egypt that I hate that. But I love Lloyd Pye, and I'm super interested in Sitchin. I think his translations are wildly inaccurate, but I love the idea. And in our DNA, there's physical signs that we've been tampered with at a certain point. We're the only people that have an uneven number of DNA posts and all kinds of stuff. So there's lots of indication that we might have been interfered with, genetically molested at times in the past. And I think that directly relates to this too. So it's really difficult to tell which technological developments are organic from us and how we're going to respond to them, because we're at maybe you feel like this too. It seems like we're at a very pivotal place where we may just click over and then suddenly the monarchy gets arrested and everyone at the NSA just gets beset upon by citizens with hammers, and every politician gets hung from the streetlights. And that could happen in a week, and then suddenly we're in a golden age. If you just took the royal family and redistributed that wealth to everyone on Earth, like what are they doing with it except using it to talk with us? And so I feel like we're that far away. We could reach out and touch the golden age, but it might be on the other side of this bottomless cavern. So if I had to guess, if I was in Vegas playing the roulette tables, I feel more like, because of how easy it was to compromise the last few generations as they came out of school, we're set up to go into a 10,000-year dark age where you are so under surveillance that there's nothing but subjugation and no hope of escape until we evolve into something else. Or remember these innate talents that we have that make us impossible to subjugate.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not. I think we've still got time. I hear you. I mean, I agree with you in terms of the tenuousness of the situation we're in right now, but I do certainly see more people waking up faster and faster every day. And so, I don't know. I think we're in for a rocky few years here, and I think depending on which way it breaks, could go either way, like you said.
I started during the quarantines, and I've gone off him a little bit, but he really leans into this idea that some people are psychically active and that there are higher entities that you can kind of tune into, and some of them that may be malevolent, if you do a lot of rituals and then suddenly there's this active, intelligent voice telling you to do things. The assumption that it's telling you to do things for good is not necessarily a sound one. And he's really interesting to me. He describes the same kind of situation. We're sort of on a razor's edge, which is really different than the inevitable turn of the Yuga wheel, but we are kind of on this precipice where we may be able to choose our truth, or the Gurdjieffian horror of the situation is we're entirely mechanical and all we really can do is watch this TV show. The big mistake is mistaking the TV show for you actually being here. You're just watching a simulator. You're not really here. None of this is actually happening. And when you go to a movie, you don't want somebody to tell you the end, like suspension of disbelief and pretending that you are Forrest Gump for a couple hours. This is the point of it. You don't want somebody to come in and say, hey, you're not Forrest Gump. But then sometimes the theater catches on fire and you think you're Forrest Gump and you forget you're in a theater and you just forget to get up and get out of the theater and you burn down. So I'm not sure how bleak you want to get about this. And I'm loving it. Part of having fun, part of being an artist, and the thing I've learned since I've moved here, attachment is the source of all suffering. If you just have a sense of humor, if you understand, I didn't write this play, I'm not the director of this, I don't even know if it's a comedy or a tragedy. I'm going to pretend it's a comedy because it's so goddamn funny if you look at it the right way. And then it's not your problem, and then you don't hurt so much when the boat doesn't go the way that you want. Non-attachment is the only liberation you're ever going to.
So talk to me a little bit about, you mentioned some symbols earlier, and I've heard it said a picture's worth 1,000 words and a symbol's worth 1,000 pictures. So talk to me a little bit about, how do you think about symbols? How did the Egyptians think about them?
I think only now, possibly during the Renaissance, certain times in the past, we are finally becoming smart enough again to understand the nature of symbols. Ian McGilchrist wrote this book that is my new Bible. I would highly recommend that you get this. It's called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. And it talks about the relationship between the left and right hemisphere. This came up in the 70s, but it kind of fell into jingoism and it kind of became associated with astrology and nonsense. And so the whole thing kind of fell out of fashion, the idea that the hemispheres are divided and separate. And there's never any activity that only takes place in one hemisphere, but there's this kind of equal and opposite counterbalance, very much like Republicans and Democrats, or in a bird. Ian McGilchrist talks about this more. I'm going to forget what the point of your question is by the time I get to the end of this, so help me when I get to the end. But McGilchrist talks about this thing that we're talking about, left hemisphere consciousness and right hemisphere consciousness. Both are necessary. They interplay, but the nature of the point of the master and his emissary is that your left hemisphere is really kind of your valet or your shield. It goes out there and interacts with the world. It kind of protects you from a lot of shit. Your right hemisphere is like this big deep thought computer. It's a clean room and you got to wear gloves and a thing when you walk in. So it's necessary to have this outer valet that does stuff for you. But like every master and servant, if the master never leaves his room, the servant will start thinking he's the master because he's the master of the outside world. And there gets to be kind of a fight between left and right brain. In a society like ours, where they literally don't want us to discover certain things about ourselves, it's no wonder that all of society, if you've ever gone to lunch and tried to read a book, you can't do it because there's music playing in the malls and in the restaurants. And our society keeps you perpetually trapped in the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere is the obvious. Left hemisphere is like when I go, how are you doing today? And okay, we're on a train track. You go to say this. I say, I'm fine. How are you? You say this. The left hemisphere is great with the obvious and what's expected of us. The right hemisphere is novel. When I come up with an idea that you've never heard of before, when I have a unique whatever, when you appreciate jokes, the zeitgeist sense is your right hemisphere. So the left hemisphere can collect information, only the right hemisphere can turn it into knowledge, can turn it into actual IQ or operating advantages. So in a culture where the entirety of it is there to keep us in this superficial mode of thought that keeps everything as separate, discrete objects, that's really the way the West works. Hieroglyphs are the expression of a time when people were geniuses, when we were still devas. Hieroglyphs work the way that your right hemisphere works. Hieroglyphs are the language of wisdom. Linear language is the language of data. You can know every data point in the world and still be an idiot, like Richard Dawkins. I think that, man, I don't want to get in a fight with Dawkins. I mean, I'll get in an actual fight with him. I could snap his neck. So hieroglyphs are the last expression of when we are mentally healthy. There was a genius. And the interesting thing is that it repairs your brain. It restores function of your brain from left hemisphere to right hemisphere. There was a Russian consciousness studies team in the 50s that showed, this is the cheapest, coolest experiments. You put that thing on your head that measures your brainwave. And you go in, you're all like agitated and whatever from the day. And you go and sit in your living room or your laboratory or whatever. And you look at a mandala, an Indian mandala. And if you look at this mandala for 2 minutes, the activity will switch from your left brain back to your right brain, and suddenly you stop thinking in spastic things and you start thinking in these continuous structures with filaments of continuity and consequence and wisdom and understanding and grounding and truth at every point. And so I started with the hieroglyphs. As an artist, I was drawn to Egypt in the first place, and I didn't know what the hieroglyphs were. I was trying to recreate the temples as visually honestly as possible. And I realized it's not about the architecture. It's about the architecture plus the overlay of hieroglyphs and specific points on the architecture. Then I had to learn what the architecture, what the symbols meant. Then everything I tried to do to understand the temples, I had to learn more and more about Egyptology. So eventually you have to get to the point where, like, what is this message that's radiated from the temples? And I did it for the most selfish of reasons. I just wanted my graphics to look cool. But everything I learned about these hieroglyphs, I realized this was the long-lost owner's manual to humanity. One of the first things it does for you through the use of hieroglyphs is it restores your operating center from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere. Every hieroglyph is a lesson in syncretism. You know that word, syncretism? That how does the 12 signs of the zodiac correspond to, whatever. In esotericism and in the universe, there's only 9 rules, 9 netters, 9 principles, and that they act on every level through everything. So occultism in the past is really, there's a reason why it's called wisdom tradition, that through understanding syncretism, you understand, if you just learn the 9 rules, then you know the whole universe. Instead of trying to learn all the individual things that the rules apply to, you'll never do that. But it's well within your grasp to understand these 7 tools, and suddenly you understand the puppeteer that puppets all of the physical phenomena in the universe. So my unnecessarily punitively long answer to your question is hieroglyphs are incredibly important, symbolic language. The motifs, even the cracks in the paintings, the pictures in the paintings are symbols as well. I mean, the paintings in Egypt and the figures and the weird postures are just as important, and they are the story as well. The hieroglyphs are quite detailed, but the biggest imagery, quite Masonic, by the way, it's all Masonic allegory. It's very interesting when you learn the stories of the temple. So the temple is this magic mirror that shows you about yourself, but it tells you this in a language that wakes you up. And so the symbolic language, didactic language of art and architecture, told through symbols, that is the most important. So first of all, good on you. I raise my glass of cheap whiskey. No, I raise my glass of coffee to you for asking that question, because that is the crux of why Egypt is so important. You will instantly start being repaired mentally to the extent that you take it seriously and listen to it instead of project on it.
It's really interesting. So I'm studying a program in Vedic science at Maharishi International, and
Wow.
Yeah, thanks. And it's funny because it's a different approach, but essentially the core of Maharishi's theory is that, and his interpretation of the Vedic knowledge is that through meditation, you can restore that synchronization in your brain, and in doing so, restore your nervous system and recognize that the fractal nature of reality, you are one with the macro.
I went to Penang. There's this just weird place by us, Malaysia, Penang. And the whole thing is like a frying pan. It's like a skillet. But there's something about the magnetic properties there that I become so kundalini active when I go. And it might be the involuntary detox that you go through when you travel. My body's just so shocked to not be all opiated and stuff. But something happens every time I go. And it is so Vedic. And also you see Vedantism peeking out from layers like a cake, or like dogs that pee on the same pole. There's just thousands of different iterations of people expressing themselves. But you see this pure Buddhism peeking through, or this pure Hinduism, Vedantism. Also, I was a fan of Egypt. The Vedanta just tells you human history. 35,000 years old, we were at a heyday, and we certainly weren't new back then, but there's something about the Western paradigm that has to constrain human development to the last 5,000 years. So I love the idea, and a little bit ironic that it's up to us Westerners, us pale round eyes, to come back around and say, wow, there's something we threw out. It's up in the basement collecting dust, and this is the most important thing that there is. And we're all busy with NFL football, professional wrestling. What's that? Yeah, like that's the most important thing in the world. And here's this thing that literally is this lost gold mine, magic mirror that tells us all the mysteries about ourselves, enables us to do magical feats. And it's sitting there, and it's just absolutely free. And by the way, thank you for saying that, because I'm right now interacting with this girl who is a Taoist folk magician. And I just realized, I'll just tell you this, I'm going to write a whole book about this. It's literally the crux of my book. I'm going to give you a pre-book spoiler, which should bleed out any potential profit that the book will have, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's a joke. It's all right there. Everything. So I keep looking at Egypt. Egyptology is these pretentious, I'm just going to say white people, Europeans, who are looking through this keyhole and they see the great stuff on the other side. And it's like, oh my God, I just caught a glimpse of something and I can see what that shape is through the keyhole. I'm going to write a whole book. I'm going to write a doctoral paper. I'm going to start a class. I'm going to start a school. I'm going to create a museum and call myself an Egyptologist. That, and then somebody else comes along and peeks through this little keyhole and they see something. And I just realized the door is not locked. At any point, you can stop looking through the keyhole. You can just walk in the fucking room. Everything that we've been trying to extract about Egypt, this genius, magical mentality, this doorway to these cities, these 128 actual provable senses that we have that the West doesn't want us to acknowledge that we have. That's what Egyptology is. And your studying of the Vedas makes me feel good, because the generation right after mine, I literally won't talk to anybody in between my age and your age. But then you came along after that, and it was kind of a course correction for what happened just after my age, and the fact that the West is starting to acknowledge, hopefully in some way because of what my mentor did, and I've tried to give John a voice until I found my own voice, and there was not a lot of people in the West talking about this stuff when I was your age, and I ruined my life. I was making so much money at Fox. I worked for Rupert Murdoch. I had that fucking job. Threw it all away to make $0 out of Magical Egypt for about 10 years, and literally just lived like a homeless person after living like a king for my whole young life.
So talk to me a little bit more about that, like how that happens. So had you met John Anthony West before the first season came out?
I met John on the floor of my office when I found his book. And at the time, I was already burned out. I'd already gone insane. I used to talk about this with Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut. I worked 7 days a week. I worked about 7 years without a day off. I would work 20 out of every 24 hours mostly, and I would just live on Frappuccinos, Starbucks Frappuccinos. I got crazy fat, but I went insane too, like legitimately insane. So I was pretty ready to quit. And I'd had more money, I thought, than I would ever be able to spend. It turns out there's no amount of money that you can never spend. Just passing that on. There is no amount of money you cannot blow through in a opulent weekend. But John, the clarity of his thought, and just that Confucius thing, if you're unclear about the world, what world am I living in, hold both models up and just look at the world and say the world corresponds to which data set. John showed me a picture of the past that, like, I didn't really care. It wasn't like a religious crusade for me. I just noticed as an artist that the art is totally out of line with what they say about the intellect of the people in Egypt. And the more I meet John, and the more he really presented it to me as this existential war between people who believe that consciousness is the most important thing and the people who believe that consciousness is nothing. And if that isn't a war between devas and asuras, because the battleground is us and what we think about ourselves. So John had this liberating thing. And also, I'm much more of a diplomat, or I'm really just a hermit. I don't know if you know J.D. Salinger is, but I really admire. J.D. Salinger wrote this book that just changed literature, and he would never talk about it. He would literally shoot at people when they come on his property. I prefer to bear traps, because you don't get in trouble. But anyway, I love that idea. I love the idea of never talking, never going out in public, never getting in fights and stuff like that. Because what does it solve? Reality doesn't change just because one person's a better arguer than the other. But John sucked me into this world that there is completely two different worlds. It's kind of a tropey idea from Star Wars. You live in heaven and hell at the same time, and it's what you tend to focus on that determines what world you live in. So when I saw Egypt, and as an artist, I always say Egypt speaks to you in your native tongue. Egypt sizes you up, and whatever genius you have, it'll speak to you in that language. So some people it talks to in math. My friend Gary sees Egypt as this, and Robert Ball too, sees Egypt as this sculpture of mathematics. I saw art. I saw this genius, universal art that is a medicine in itself and is a visible, physicalized expression of music and mathematical harmony. And so I saw that, and it spoke to me in that way. John was not that. So John was a theatrical man. He very performative, but a scrapper. I'm always not really trying to make peace. I've given up on the world and people, but I just prefer to withdraw and work on my own things and just, I'm going to do this. And if anybody else wants to lean in and look at what I'm doing, that's fine. I don't care anymore if anybody believes this. I've found the answer, and fuck everybody in this world. I've stopped thinking I'm going to help anybody or save anybody, but I found this open door that no one was attending, and I walked in, and it goes straight to the heart of the temple, and I can tell anybody how to get there. Most people don't want to go to the trouble. But John, to me, was my doorway.
Not to interrupt your flow, Chance, but I do think the tides are turning there. I came across John Anthony West's work originally through Graham Hancock's work, and I know that Graham Hancock has reached just an entire generation of folks. Joe Rogan has really done a lot to help amplify his voice, and getting on the Netflix series. Like, it's, what is it that John Anthony West would always say? It's like, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come, but the second most powerful thing is an idea that does not want to let go, right? So something like that, he says a lot more eloquently. And I am confident that we are just at that tipping point where it's happening.
I feel like that too. You make me feel good. People like you really make you feel good. The reason I keep moving farther and farther from the West, smaller and smaller islands with less and less technology, is I am so afraid of the world going the other way. And I can't tell you how much it's an existential medicine for me to hear people like yourself talking about this, because it's so obvious once you look at it. And then you're like, oh, what an idiot I was for not noticing this before. But you have to have the faith that you've been lied to about pretty much everything to liberate yourself, to look at this as if it were true. Because it's not the thing, it's your perception of the thing that's been modified.
Right. It is, you're right. It's crazy. Wow. So man, so many of the things I still want to ask you about. So what do you think about the Sphinx? Obviously one of John Anthony West's kind of key realizations from Schwaller de Lubitz's book was recognizing that there was water weathering on the Sphinx, which obviously completely changes the whole timeline of it. So, when you think about that, what does that indicate to you about the age of ancient Egypt?
A new thing that is really hitting me, it's heavy, it's a big thing. The Egyptian eyes, that weird exaggeration of the shape of the eye, it's so obvious that they're creating Asian eyes. When you look at papyrus, when you look at pictograms, when you look at the way the Japanese write, and you look at the Jomon, possibly 30,000-year-old civilization, incredible sculptors. In the land that I live in Thailand and in Cambodia and Vietnam, and it's all just literally like going around California and Nevada. It's such a tiny space. I think one of the biggest things that either nobody's figured out yet in Orthodox Egyptology, or for some reason they don't want us to connect these two things, and I'll tell you this. Remind me about the phallus of Osiris. This might be the most important new idea I've come across. Asia and Egypt have much more of a connection than most people acknowledge. And here, the reason we live here, by the way, is this whole town is 1,000-year-old temples. So this is the place. There's a town next to us, actually, Ayutthaya. It was the old capital. It's like as old as Rome. And these temples have just never stopped being there. And everywhere you go, there's sphinxes. They're different art direction, but they're sphinxes. They're paired lions. And I tell you where they come from. We can talk about this later. There's a biological basis for those twin sphinxes. They also represent the left and right hemisphere. So whenever you see sphinxes, if they're done correctly, symbolically, accurately, like in Washington, D.C. at the Freemasons Lodge, one of the sphinx's eyes is open, one's closed. In the tarot deck, the charioteer. The charioteer is piloting a chariot driven by two sphinxes. One's white with black stripes, one's black with white stripes. They're your two hemispheres. The charioteer is the Shiva in the middle of the two hemispheres. The Sphinx is an incredibly important symbol, but this is tricky, slippery language, because you can't say originates, but we see perfectly intact models of the symbolism of the Sphinx. Much more robust, much more thought through, much better executed, frankly, in Asia all the way back. And then you see it in Egypt, and it's beautiful and it's stark, but it sort of looks like an inherited idea, like the Xerox of the Xerox of the Xerox, where you start to oversimplify and fetishize. You start worshiping the statue instead of the idea that the statue stands for. So right now, the Sphinx and several other things really interest me because those are such distinctly and completely well understood symbols in the East. Because Western Egyptologists don't want to acknowledge the thinking and honestly how much longer the East has been around and how much greater intellectual development they've accomplished. It's not a very popular thing to talk about. But the aging of the Sphinx, I see it in Cambodia. Like the point of the Sphinx is interesting. Honestly, there's so many things that could have. I would never say this when John was alive, but there's so many things that could have caused. Like if the Sphinx was used as a fountain for a couple hundred years, you'd have that same vertical, and it's in a pool. Like it could have been in the middle of a water feature. I mean, the whole thing's sunken for a reason. So I've never been that excited about the Sphinx theory, but right next to the Sphinx, it's Valley Temple. There's this thing that's built like Stonehenge. It's not Egyptian architecture. And there's one other one at Abydos. It's another Stonehenge. It's square Stonehenge, but these slabs are massive. The slabs are almost like those pyramid-sized slabs. Incredible. Abydos is even more interesting because the ground level's here, and the Osirion is built like geologists know. So if you rewind time enough to where this was on bedrock, that's like Vedic old, 30, 40,000 years old. In the Valley Temple and all over the place, and this is what interests me about Angkor Wat, that's why I'm working that now, overprinting. So the very first things that the first dynasty Egypt built, they built over the top of a ruin that was so fucking old that nobody knows what to say about it, and you can tell by the age. So the oldest things in Egypt were built on top of something that was already unbelievably old, including the pyramid. The pyramid was there before the current culture was. Lots of people take credit for it for touristy, commercial reasons, but that thing was there. No hieroglyphs, absolutely. And it wasn't built for people, by the way. That's crazy. If you're a velociraptor or something, you can pivot at the hip. That architecture is right up your alley, baby. But humans, no, that wasn't built for humans. So the Sphinx is there, and it's interesting, and it's the flagship. There's another Sphinx that's missing. Sphinxes are supposed to occur in pairs. So that's a broken, messed up.
I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, I've heard different theories, that maybe it's still just buried under the sand. I've also heard that maybe it's on Mars. I mean, what do you think about either of those possibilities?
I got so excited. I know Richard Hoagland. I don't want to say anything mean about him in public. I was super excited. I named my first business Sidonia after the Sidonia Desert. There's something weird. Like the original name of Cairo is Nasser, which also means Mars. The deep Egyptians themselves have some weird relationship with Mars. And so even though I don't find Hoagland a particularly credible source, I absolutely believe stuff's up there. I kind of feel like after I was involved with Edgar Mitchell and I used to live right by JPL, I don't think the images we saw from Mars are actually from Mars. I think there's a place somewhere that are sending these fake, because you can see spark plugs and stuff. The retouchers, I was a retoucher for so many, they are doing that. They absolutely are doing that. And I think, I don't know, and it's not either or. I think there's lots of discontinuous shots that are just shot in a desert somewhere on Earth. I don't believe that I think that if there are some images, like in the Stephen Greer thing, Stephen Greer's disclosure, I've found some really credible people in his disclosures, including the retoucher. I'm always interested in this because I've spent so much of my life retouching. There seems to be really legitimate people that are retouching things for NASA that are all day long retouching out architecture. They're up on the moon and on Mars. So I'm totally down. I'm working in Unreal Image, by the way. In addition to editing and writing this book, I've just became obsessed. I lost a whole year learning Unreal Image. And I'm making an interactive game that is the Egyptian afterlife, but part of it is that portal technology, and I really want to include a module where you somehow are up on Mars wandering around the Martian ruin architecture. So I love that idea. I'm right with you on that.
That's interesting. Not to get too sidetracked, but I'm curious, did you ever ask Edgar Mitchell, if Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landings?
I will never stop kicking myself because he's an intimidating character. And I was the first time I ever talked to him, I'll just say this is a long time ago, and I don't advocate this type of behavior, but I was driving from Los Angeles to San Diego, smoking a fatty. I was just crazy high, and I get a call out of the blue. Hey, Edgar Mitchell's calling. I'm like, fuck, no, do not let Edgar Mitchell call me. I'm super high. I do not want to talk to Edgar Mitchell for the first time when I'm this high. Don't do it. Right? Hello, this is Edgar Mitchell. Shit. So I'm driving down the road and I pull over, and my first talk, I'm just wrecked. And he was such a kind man. And because I'm an animator, right away we could establish these scientific, like, are you talking about X up, Y up, Z? What's your Z axis? So he was explaining to me the rotisserie. Do you know they call it the rotisserie? He's a giant piece of chicken when he's in that module. So the module has to continually spin so that he gets even baking from the celestial radiation. I fucking love that guy. Chuck Yeager and all those people, you're not only, first of all, you have to, this is the days before calculators, by the way. You got a slide ruler? I don't know if you ever tried to do calculus on a slide ruler. You're up there, you're spinning, you're trying not to throw up. You have to figure out the contradictory trajectory blast while you're spinning, trying not to throw up. And you don't have a calculator, you have a slide rule to write your orbit or you will die. I mean, that's what kind of tough as nails, don't fuck with me kind of people. And they're military, and they're tough. And you don't get frivolous with Edgar. And so in all the times I talked to him, so on point, and I didn't want him to think I was one of those people. And in retrospect, which I did, like they always say, you never regret the stuff you do. You always regret at the end of the life. And that one for me, every night when I go to sleep, if I can't fall asleep right away, I'm like, oh, why didn't I ask him? So about a week after my business with Edgar concluded, he went on that radio show and said, yeah, I'll just admit it. I'm an old man. What are they going to take away from me? There's all kinds of stuff up there. And he was quite candid. You know, he was born in Roswell. Edgar was born in Roswell. Is that crazy?
Wow, that's crazy. No, I didn't know that.
Weird. Plus, he had a kundalini experience, so I'm super interested in that. That's the whole thing. If you get Len McTaggart's book called The Field, the first 3 pages.
I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. It's funny you're talking about Edgar Mitchell and Stephen Greer. I mean, my whole spiritual awakening was when I first saw one of Greer's documentaries, and so it's cool to hear all the connections there.
Yeah, really interesting. So Greer, there's another really important thing about Greer that he just kind of threw away one time. When he was sick and was bedridden for a long time, and he was delirious, he had this fever delirium, his mind would wander. Goethe, same thing happened to Goethe when Goethe discovered the hypnagogic realms. Your brain is all like squished up like a spider. Your mind, not your brain. Your mind is greater than 3D. Your body's 3D, but your mind is greater than 3D. Your mind might be 14 dimensions, might be 4, it might be 3.5, I don't know. But all we know is your mind unfurls in a larger dimension under certain circumstances. Part of the reason you can communicate with disincarnate entities when you're tripping is a lot of the, again, stuff we've been programmed to think doesn't exist. We lose that self-skepticism under certain circumstances. Your brain starts extending these tendrils or unfolding in these higher dimensions. And suddenly there's no difference in space between me and you because spatial separation is an illusion in the 3rd dimension, but it doesn't exist in the 4th dimension. Very well visualized by Patrick Stewart character in the X-Men, how he would get in a certain state and he could see everything at once all around him. It's different, like the Nesh. So that's it. Greer discovered it and put it into really interesting words. And so the reason that aliens will come and look in on people in certain mind states, and he developed that whole protocol about how to contact them and things you can get, it really is this, like imagine we're all laying down on our face and some aliens looking at 1 million people all laying down on the ground with their noses pressed to the ground. And then one person stands up and some alien looking at this from above might come down and, well, you're an interesting character. What are you standing up for? And they're curious. I've had several aliens looking on me like, what are you? Aren't you weird?
It's so funny the way you just described it. I had that exact experience on mushrooms one time when I was in Wyoming, and it was just like, okay. It was funny, and it was like funny for me and the being. Like we both had a laugh about it.
Yeah, not monster, malevolent. I've met several demons, the worst fucking things you've ever seen. But also most of these really strange things. A lot of them have an incredible sense of humor, and they just, like one time, possibly one of my first DMT trips, Suddenly I'm in just there with these two things, and they're giant and they're awful, but they're fascinated by me. And the whole time they're telling me, you're a bug to us. You're disgusting. Like, I've wiped things off my ass that remind me of you. And they're kind of fucking with me and telling me how small and gross I am. But they're like, at the same time, I want to tell you something. You're like a cockroach. And they show me this visual cockroach on a plane. You can take that plane and tilt it 90 degrees, and the cockroach is still walking on that same plane, but he's walking perpendicular to all his friends that are on the first plane, and showing me all these things like you can turn in this direction you've never thought of and literally phase out of 3D. It's something you can do all the time, and I can just show you how to do it, and you'd be like this unfathomable magician. And it's simple to us, and it's obvious to us because we're looking down on you from this higher dimension. And we might show you because it's funny for us to show you, but also we kind of like looking at you in this disgusting fallen state. And just this weird dialogue, but it was all about them laughing at how close I was to be able to travel interdimensionally. But it was just this thought that I'd never had, that I believed I would never have. I love those things. It's a kind of sociology that Terence McKenna got me started on, that particular kind of sociology.
So we touched on the possibility of a Sphinx on Mars. I'm curious, do you think there could be another one on Earth?
Oh, we know there are. They're all over the place. They're just in different art direction. There are, there's a giant pyramid in China that you're forbidden. You literally death penalty for bringing it up, for researching it. There may or may not be one in Bosnia. My friend Robert Schock kind of pulled the plug on that one. I'm not sure he was correct in that. Yonaguni seems to be one also that Robert Schock doesn't acknowledge. But yeah. They're all over the place. Oddly enough, confined to the 33rd parallel. I don't know what that means. I was just talking to somebody the other day. Just this thought popped into my head. We almost died from a coronal mass ejection back, I think, right when we were supposed to die in 2012 or whatever. And it barely missed us. I've been working with Tony Wright about this idea that your right hemisphere is moving backward in time and your left hemisphere is moving forward in time. And that a lot of this seeming time travel stuff comes from that. But if you had somebody who was aware of the ultimate fate of the Earth, and this person was smart enough engineering-wise and knew enough trajectory, you build these giant weights. The pyramid's located exactly in the middle of the continuous landmass, and the pyramid all by itself, or the series of pyramids exactly at the 33rd parallel, might have been just enough to imperceptibly slow the travel of the Earth so that when that CME came by, it just barely missed us. Utterly pointless, a flight of fancy there, but it just occurred to me that idea. But anyway, whatever this technology was, it seems to be that these symbols were chosen because they most accurately represent aspects of our psyche and mechanisms of the mind. So the lion has very so I don't know if you sent those or watched those most recent things. Since I've done the show, I found the Baphomet. The Baphomet is another one of those biological indications that I don't even know what to start saying about that. But the very oldest of the goddesses, Ishtar, she has hawk feet. And so she has the fused legs of the medulla oblongata. She has those same torso. For her, when you cut a brain out, I'm not saying I've done this. I'm also not saying I haven't done it. But when you dig up a body out of the graveyard in the middle of the night when no one's looking and you cut the head open and you take the brain out, you have to cut these trigeminal nerves. And they're like this little hand. There's this fucking creepy alien centipede in the middle of I'm going to do this animation. This fucking monster that lives in the middle of us and it has these evil little hands. And those are the trigeminal nerves. When you see the whole thing, it's a fucking monster. It's an alien centipede. It's horrible. But they've cut off the trigeminal nerves and all the things that make it look scary. So they always show it like this. And those are your two trigeminal nerves coming out of the pons. So Ishtar, the oldest one, is on bird feet. She's the only goddess that's portrayed with bird feet. So if you actually look at the bird feet, it splits into four, which is what your spinal column does. It splits into the four rivers in the Bible. They talk about the four rivers that go through the Garden of Eden. Your spinal cord and the liquid, the cerebral spinal fluid that's all about the kundalini process, splits into four. And so those legs, it's an accurate depiction of that spine and the voice of God that we hear. And so the thing she's standing on is twin lions. They have these two lions that look backward and forward. So I've been working with Brad for about 14 years on these artistic correspondences. Thank you for saying you've seen that. You and about 1,000 other people on Earth have seen that show. And there's this old joke. If I could reach just one person with my work, I'm going to starve to death. That's not nearly enough. Anyway, so it's the Sphinx. I'm only saying this because you asked about this. Most people don't care about this. Sphinx has an actual physical counterpart. The way that the perch, that the little goddess, diencephalon, pons, and the medulla oblongata are perching at the top of your spine, and there's this two bones that look exactly like two little sphinxes laying out in each direction. And the medulla oblongata, that's where it rests, perches upon. And then those bird feet are the most physically accurate description of the way the medulla doesn't bifurcate, it quadrifurcates, or whatever that word is, octicates. I'm going to go octicate later. Anyway, so the Sphinx has this actual biological representation, and it is the thing the medulla rests on. And that for people who are just listening to this and haven't actually seen the show, the thing that makes Magical Egypt unusual is that we show that the basis for artwork in ancient Egypt was depictions of not just the human brain, but specifically the parts of the brain that contribute to consciousness, and the crossover point between the meat and the mind. And so this specific part of the brain in Egypt, in Sumeria, all over Asia, and all the way up to the Renaissance, really, has been depicted as a goddess or god figure, indicating that there's something divine about this consciousness, and the consciousness that is centrist and before the consciousness of the the cerebellum and the hemispheres and stuff. So this always has been much simpler and much more complicated than people make it, that this is a magic mirror. It's a schematic of you, and not just a schematic of the meat wagon you walk around in, but a schematic of this actual divinity within you that makes you, that makes you think thoughts, that makes you attracted to what's attractive. And all of human history seemed to know it except us. And why don't we know it?
Yeah, it's funny you end with that, because there's something I wanted to ask you that we were talking about earlier. I can't remember if it was before we started recording or not, but we were talking about the Monroe Institute and the CIA's kind of appropriation of their work and, using it for their purposes with that in mind. And the obvious recognition that Egyptology very much tries to dismiss the importance of consciousness, that field of inquiry. Do you think that there's any influence from the intelligence agencies within mainstream Egyptology?
Absolutely is. The intelligence community is just like the police force. They're not there for good. They're not there to help. They are there to police and to keep the separation in place between those with power and those without. The education system, exactly the same. Printing every single institution of Western history isn't there for our good. It's there the way the walls were originally, to contain people. They're not there to protect people. They're there to contain and constrain people. So the intelligence community, if you ever watch Blacklist, like I do not watch television. It literally gives me irritable bowel syndrome. But I walk in sometimes and Denise is watching things, and she was watching this thing called Blacklist. And it was just about this really high strata in the intelligence community where everyone's a master criminal, everyone's Robert Mitchell, or Ghislaine's dad.
Robert Maxwell? Yeah.
That is the era of arch criminal. Those are the handmaidens and the foot soldiers of the powerful, and they're only there when they're doing their job. They're there to protect this certain valuable information, this certain empowering information. When they're off work and they go rogue, like little dingoes stealing sandwiches, they're all very wealthy, because if you're in the intelligence community, you're a master criminal with a key to the city and you're above the law. So the stink of Western intelligence and the Eastern intelligence, way smarter and way I run up against that every once in a while. And you can just tell, like, God damn, how slick Eastern intelligence, invisible, whereas Western intelligence is something different. Western intelligence relies on changing your perceptions rather than actually being subtle. But yeah, all over the place, and it's there specifically for the same reason that the schools got restructured, and the same reason why the news is so compromised, that the new way of maintaining power is to restrict our access to information, mostly about ourselves, but also about magic and about everything.
What do you mean by Eastern versus Western intelligence?
So the West is Australia, England, America, you know that. And so the East, all the Asian countries, the Asian mentality when it comes to diplomacy. I mean, goddamn, just for yourself, just to become a completed person, read Confucius. Confucius has these thoughts very tied up in the art of war. And these sensibilities that just don't work in the Western psyche, like the importance of being invisible. Like nobody ever told me how important it was to be invisible when you travel. But that same idea, the dark forest theory, way better to be invisible. I grew up in California, where you would starve to death if you weren't a human flamingo. Like if you weren't famous, you could literally starve to death in a restaurant because nobody would pay attention to you. So you learn to call attention to yourself on every level. Part of life in Hollywood. And then you leave and you're like, God damn, that was the worst advice I ever got. Because the true operating system in the dark forest is never call attention to yourself. So those differences in thinking really play out. So here's a very specific example. Venice and I go to Malaysia all the time. And frequently, just for whatever reason, Australians do this too. They put policemen in civilians' clothes to stand in line and just like chat you up to see if you're insane or like somebody's going to say, "Oh, I've come here to murder the authorities." Nobody's ever going to say that, but they put intelligence operatives in the line talking. And I meet these people, and I've always been fascinated by this. There's some people that are just too smart and too polished. They speak English too well, and it's not their. There's a way intelligence people learn languages that's flawless and effortless. Plus, they learn it in addition to neuro-linguistic programming and the ability to shut up and listen, which is not a naturally occurring human trait in the West. And so you meet these people and you're like, God, this person is so much smarter than she needs to be, and her English is so good. And I bet she's going to start subtly asking me questions about what I do for a living. Oh, what do you do for a living then, Chance? And she already knows my name and everything about me. And I'm drawn in because she's laughing at all my jokes. And I realize, oh my God, I'm talking to a spy. And they're so subtle and they're so invisible. And the ninja, the ninja principle, it's not really a Western principle, harmonizing with your environment to the point that you disappear. And so that's what I mean. Eastern intelligence plays a long game, and Western intelligence is more overt, but they have better tools, better toys.
Yeah. Wow. That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned the phallus of Osiris earlier. Let's talk about that.
All right. So I've been alluding to this the whole time. Even in Egypt, well, first of all, in magic, and in Heka, you probably heard this line, when the gods distributed magic to humanity, Egypt got 9 measures, and the rest of the world got the final measure.
I love that. Yeah.
In Egypt, they're awesome. Amazing. Venice, by the way, wrote this episode. This is the first episode that Venice wrote and produced. I was underwater with Unreal Engine. I took a year off, and when I kind of came to, Venice had Heka written, and good on her. And she's nailing it. She's working on the next ones right now. What were you talking about? What was the? Oh yeah. So the phallus of Osiris. Even in Egypt, there's a similar model, a similar symbol where a god was broken up into pieces and then magically reassembled, except there was one important piece missing. And you know what it was? It was Osiris' phallus. I've been not romantically involved, but I've been involved with this gentleman named Mantak Chia for a long time. He's a Thai gentleman, and he does kundalini work, this very Eastern spin on kundalini work. I believe that the reason why Asian influence and the institution of Egypt is kept apart, the missing phallus of Osiris is the Taoist sex magic. Everything in Egypt points to kundalini, but everything in Egyptology denies the presence of kundalini, and Egyptology has really impressed me as being gatekeepers there to prevent us from ever learning about Egypt. If you know about Zahi actually was educated in the Edgar Cayce occult. He went to school as a New Age person. He was the product of the school. And then he was stationed there to keep anybody from ever learning anything. And apparently, if you go as a Rosicrucian, you can take tours of parts of the pyramid, parts of the Sphinx that they deny are there. But of course they're there. And if you're a high enough initiate, then you can go and see them. And he's the policeman of that. So the missing phallus of Osiris is this tradition of sex magic and kundalini that's absolutely been removed from Egypt. And it takes young, earnest souls like you and I to say, this car is almost complete except for this little weird piece of metal here. But I found that if I take this metal and I slide it in this slot, and if I turn it 90 degrees to the right, the whole car comes alive. And that is, in my opinion, and I don't know if anybody has published this yet, that the missing phallus, the key that turns on the vehicle of Egypt, is hidden in the East in this Taoist tantric practice. And once you combine those two pieces that were taken apart, the whole thing comes alive, and that everything that Egypt isn't explicit about, the Mantak Chia, energetic, kundalini, sex magic traditions, are literally the unanswered question that Egypt raises. That is the missing phallus of Osiris.
So you think it's a symbolic idea, but could it also be an actual item?
I think it's an idea. I think it is a missing idea. I don't think that Osiris ever actually existed. I think that it's an allegory. And it is a primordial allegory. He is, oh my God, there's this movie, an English movie, David Niven was in it, and it is a modern, more modern, it was done in black and white days when David Niven was young, but it was called Kill the King. And if you ever listen to any heavy metal, there's a whole generation in heavy metal where they would use lyrics from occult traditions to make songs. And that I always was raised on the song Kill the King. This incredible thing that is Osiris magic, where the life force of the king is intentionally killed. So every noble king would go back and be murdered by his. Oh, this is in Midsummer too, very same thing. You ensure the fertility of nature through human sacrifice. And the point of the king was to give his 100% all, and he would then infuse the land. And so what you see later, Osiris post-rulership, he's green, he's the land and he's nature. And frequently you'll see him on his back with all of these sprouts popping up. So it's an ancient aliens thing. It's a truncation of reality, and I think it's a mental trap to try and assign reality. I mean, maybe the people were there, maybe they weren't, but the point of them is not to look for physical traces, but to say, the key to this, the sword and stone, the sword in the stone itself is this thing. If you can extract truth from the stone, from these temples, you extract the secret and you will be king. If a person shows up with.
I hear you, but I also think there could be an element of as above, so below, right? Where it is a concept, but it's also a material thing as well.
There's no reason why it wouldn't. I'm with you. I don't mean to say that so black and white, like I know or believe one way or another. I mean, people do great things and they resonate through history, and sometimes people's names. I don't discount the fact that any of this was actually true. Tell me what physical. What is it that you're asking about? The physical traces of something. I want to make sure I understand your statement.
So yeah, no, that's a good question. And let me maybe take it a step back, and I'm definitely going to butcher it, but my basic understanding of Egyptian cosmology is that Set cuts up Osiris and spreads his body parts across the world, and Isis is able to recover all of the pieces except the phallus, and that almost represents kind of like this age we're in today, where it's like we're driven by the penis, by this kind of basic materialist, animalistic instinct. But I also think, there's clearly tunnels under the Giza Plateau. I mean, there's things that these guys preserved for reasons. And so I also don't think it's out of the question that there is potentially Osiris's phallus somewhere waiting to be returned.
A really good thought. And these are the ways, Egyptology has never been improved by Egyptologists. It's always people like you. It's always outsiders who come up with a new thought that's unthinkable to Egyptologists that turns out to actually be the case. So you're absolutely right. Now that you've mentioned that, I have to say, I'm more interested in the symbolic message of Egypt, but you can't be there and not get caught up in every single day they're finding new stuff. And there's something KV-25, I believe, that is actually called the Tomb of Osiris, and it's vast and clearly wasn't built for a human. I was raised on H.P. Lovecraft, and I love the idea that in ages before men were even a thing, there were big, giant things walking around that all kinds of different traditions have different explanations for what these big giant things were. And also the kings list in Egypt, the farther back you go when they talk about all the kings that ruled and how long they ruled, the farther back you go, those people were ruling for 3,500 years. Like one guy had a reign, and then So by the time you get back, I think maybe Osiris is on that list, and he had some crazy, like 10,000 year reign. And then there's this KV-25 that is actually, I don't know if that's like something Zahi just called the Tomb of Osiris to make more money about it, or if it actually is. But there's something there. There's clearly something there. You've also brought up, you remind me of the idea of cargo cult. This is one of the funniest things in the world. I think I'm going to animate this in the next season in Heka. You know the idea of the cargo cult? Only bringing this up because I think humanity is a cargo cult of something that we don't understand. Here's a fantastic story. It's hard to tell this nowadays because it sounds kind of racist, but it's absolutely true. It's just this gem of sociology. When the West first started interacting with deep cultures in either the Amazon or one of these really primitive places like Zulus. Imagine that the first time Zulus encounter men. Men show up on this biplane, this old stupid biplane like a crop duster, because that's what flying technology was back in the 50s. And they leave. Whatever, do a little bit of trading, do a little bit of talking. And they come back the next year, and they weren't Zulus, but one of the tribe had taken sticks and leaves and mud and made a perfect replica out of sticks of the biplane, the vehicle of the gods. And this was an object of worship for them. And they didn't understand aerodynamics. They didn't understand that there was stuff inside that turned on. They just took the outer physicality of this thing they didn't understand and turned it into a fetish object, turned it into an object of worship. I could take a cat or a dog to New York and walk onto the market, the stock market, and the cat's there, and the cat sees all the numbers. The cat has no idea what's going on. The cargo cult idea is hilarious to me. It's a very Kurt Vonnegut kind of idea that we tend to be so enamored with our intellect, but so much of our theology is a cargo cult. We've made this idiotic mockery with sticks and mud of something that's crazy. And the idea that we're ever going to understand. Here's another reason to read the three-body problem. The name three-body problem comes from this simple idea that you can calculate any mathematical variable, but when you're trying to calculate the trajectory of the Earth around two suns, you can do it. That's a two-body problem. When there's a third sun, the math becomes too complicated. Any triple variable math problem is too complicated for the human mind, too complicated for our technology at its current state. So in the universe, how many two-body problems, how many three-body problems, now how many four-body problems, how many million fucking body problems? The universe itself is an infinite body problem. The human mind breaks down at three variables. And so what hope do we have of ever having any more relationship than a cargo cult relationship with the everything? And so really the only thing that we have any hope of understanding, because it's the only thing we can actually watch on a minute-by-minute basis, is this intangible thing. But I just thought you might appreciate that. That cargo cult idea, when you start applying that to so much in society, it's funny. It's funny in an ironic kind of way.
Yeah. Well, and it gets back to the whole nature of reality as being consciousness, right? If you're going to create an inversion of reality to maintain control, then you naturally have to just create a narrative of what this world is.
Yeah. And by changing that one little thing, the universe is dead versus the universe is alive, the universe is body instead of the universe is mind. What a simple, fantastically powerful fulcrum where you can subvert all truth by that one little switch in our perception. It's not a switch in the universe, it's a switch in our perception. And it's fascinating to me. Philosophy keeps changing, but the universe never changes. It's just that we're putting on these different colored lenses, and it's all a form of cargo culting. But in the middle of all of that, and I'm sorry to sound so schizophrenic, but there are these bedrock truths that we've hit upon, and there's this intuitive faculty that you clearly have. When you read the Vedas, how weird. Blue people and bits of water coming in, any of that, but then you read it like there's something in you. There's this idea called anamnesis. It was a Plato's idea.
Yeah, right.
That if the principle is true, which I believe it is, and this is not a remarkable idea in the East, that your consciousness moving through a series of vehicles over time. So you've got thousands and thousands of lives. These bedrock truths, the most important ideas and learning moments that you've had in all previous lives. There's a partition, just like you don't want people to give away a movie when you're watching it. We have partitions from the things we've learned in previous lives. But there's something about really strong truths and really beautiful epiphanies when you find something in this life that was a really important thing for you last time, the trueness of it hits you, and you know on this unconscious level that it's true. And so your attraction to the Vedas, for me, a lot of Masonic symbolism really pulled me into this. And then you see this pyramid that you've seen probably in 400 of your previous incarnations. It's like one of the things you've had in common with most of your memorable lives. But the idea of anamnesis is that when you see something true, you instantly know it because you've proved it to be true. When I had my first kundalini experience, I got reconnected with this body of work that I'd done in some previous life where dozens of different really complicated guitar styles, some of them like nobody plays. I just one day, I had this friend, Frank Infante, he was the guitar player for Blondie. He's amazing. Remember Blondie? Are you too young to remember Blondie, the band?
Yeah, I remember Blondie.
So, you know, Frankie is a sickly little hero, sickly little Italian man. He's just an old cranky Italian guy now. But he and I would sit with him and play. And there were things that he would do that I could just do. And I didn't know that I could do them. But when I saw somebody else do them in the field, I was in his field. But after this Kundalini thing, I was gifted several lifetimes worth of effort. Because I can play piano, I can play guitar. I wrote all the soundtracks in season 3. I did all that, and a lot of them in season 2. And I haven't.
So cool.
I've been so busy with Unreal Engine that I haven't really helped Bernice as much on Heka. I did all the animations in Heka. I really had fun with that. That was all Unreal Image. But anyway, all of this is just to say anamnesis, that I had this interesting anamnesis experience where a lot of the information that you've accumulated over multiple lifetimes is in there somewhere. This is another one of those devas and asuras. You might have full access to everything you've ever learned if you can just unlearn what you learned in school that told you it wasn't there. I looked around for Bernice. She contributed a lot of the great thinking to Heka. But everything that I brought up, you need to have learned to understand our relationship with Heka, mostly the cargo cult. So much of modern Western occultism is a cargo cult. People designing pointless rituals that are just sticks and mud that observe the outer form but don't have the working mechanisms. And there's this crosswind of religious overprinting. The worst thing that ever happened to we Westerners is that we had our actual traditions taken away from us and overprinted. I've got this little cassette from heaven, and someone took it and taped over it with Christian theology and overprinted our natural relationship with the cycles of time and stuff. So I'll just say, to start this branch of the conversation, I did magic last because I had to grow so much to be able to process these ideas. It's the most complicated thing there is. It's the reason Egyptologists won't touch it. And it is just pure poison for an academic. It's poison for a scientist. But if you can just make that little concession, like my pal Rupert Sheldrake, that if you allow for a conscious universe, then it's not unreasonable to have interactions with the living fabric of reality. And so as long as you firmly keep in mind the tendency to create a cargo cult out of a legitimate phenomenon, and you don't start thinking you understand it, but you can interact with it, I have to say magic per se, like pulling it away from science, there's this thing called the God of the gaps. Christians use this a lot, that science doesn't understand this and therefore God did it. But you can use the inverse of that too, and to say everything that science does is right and everything that's not contained within science is woo-woo. But that's the inverse God of the gaps argument, and that there's lots of things that science would appreciate as soon as we understand the electromagnetic nature, that there's no electricity without magnetism. Our body, all the temples here show the human body with the magnetic spiritual fire coming off of us. Like at some point, somebody could see with all 3 eyes, and that's what makes these temples so beautiful. So I am uncomfortable even with that word magic. I love the word Heka. I do love the word Heka, the principle of the shortcut of working from one, like 2 moms talking together to bypass the whole student-teacher association. Heka is this really interesting technology that entirely depends on this thing that Western science swears doesn't exist. So maybe that's a good starting point for this.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I think in Heka, the latest piece of Magical Egypt that you just released, you mentioned something about there was like 80 or so different forms of Heka, right? And none of them really align to what we would call magic. So could you talk about what does that whole universe look like?
Rupert Sheldrake talks about hierarchies of consciousness in the body, that you have these fields that govern. So you have one field that governs your whole existence. Then you have another field that just governs your brain. You have another field that's just your liver. Every single aspect of you has a hierarchical intelligence, sort of like governors and mayors and the dad of the house or the mom of the house or whatever. You have these hierarchies or nodes of consciousness. And so you can appeal to semantics. Language is very difficult when you're talking about magic because of this powerology discussion. And if you study how all magical language has been weeded out of Western society, the active nature of a lot of the words we have for magic just don't exist. So we have to use foreign words, a lot of pedantic words. And so that's what different types of magic, different schools of magic. So there's natural magic, the Kabbalion, and those 7 rules of natural law. The very first rule is all is mind. The next one, the pendulum swing. The third one is about sexes or polarities. Every one of those 7 things really are the 7 types of magic, the 7 arenas that you can exercise magic. So Tony Robbins, in a certain way, and it's not Tony Robbins, it's there are people in the 20s that wrote, I'm talking about. Yeah, think Napoleon Hill. There is a certain kind of magic that there's even smile magic. You just forcing a smile makes you feel better. That is a kind of correspondence magic. There's another much more complicated kind of magic that is involved in voodoo dolls, synchronous or sympathetic magic, where if I have a doll that looks like you and I pick holes in it or whatever. So when you think about that, I was just talking to Mog. How cool is Mog, by the way, in Heka? Mog is the really cool British guy, the magician. He's an actual Egyptologist who's a practical magician. I think we're going to spend some time with him in London coming up. Anyway, he's really interested in this, and he's very eloquent about this, that depending on your aims, there's lots of different types of magic, and you have to come into resonance with different hierarchies of intelligences. And there's lots of cargo cult magic, and there's lots of disincarnate entities that are disingenuous, but will pretend to be things you want and pretend to give you things. If you go down any street in New York, you'll find lots of people. Not all of them are going to be your friend. I've also, my introduction to magic when I was young was through Clive Barker, and a lot of the stories in the West all involve magic gone wrong. But later, as I got older, we met Stephen Skinner, who is an amazing guy. We met Skinner and became a really good drinking buddy of mine. Skinner is such an operative magician. He lives in Singapore. You know who I'm talking about, Stephen Skinner? He's the bald guy. He's very proper and precise. He was in front of the Sydney Opera House in Heka. He is wonderfully educated. He's kind of like the Rupert Sheldrake of magic. But he talks a lot about magic preparation.
There's another question I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned how magic has been removed from a lot of history in the West, yet Disney is all about magic and clearly a very powerful and possibly the most powerful company in media. What do you make of that?
I'll tell you a cool story about that. I live with my head in the sand quite a lot, and a lot of people, not a lot, but interesting people contact me a couple times a year, and they're really obsessed with the show. I get a phone call from this guy, and his name is Michael Aquino. You know that name?
I do.
And he loves the show. And I start talking to him, and he's a charming guy, smart, and and then I find out he's leader of the Church of Set, which used to be the Church of Satan, Temple of Set, used to be the Church of Satan, of Entangled. And so I become really interested in him because as the leader of the Temple of Set, there's so much about Set that I want to know. And he obviously is the founder of the Temple of Set. And it turned out he really had kind of a truncated knowledge of what Set was, and he was using it more as an organizational symbol than really sharing any insights. But one of the first things when we talked, and then eventually I figured out who he was, and then he died in this really horrible way that you probably don't want to know about. But anyway, one of the first things he told me, I forgot why it came up so early in our conversations, but I had mentioned, so he brought up Disneyland for some reason, I forgot why. And I said, there's a place in Disneyland, it's called 33. I'm sure you know all about this, but there's a room that you can only get into if you're a certain kind of person and if you have a certain kind of special membership, but also if you're a prominent member of the magical community. It is rumored, I said, that a lot of prominent magicians and occultists have access to this room. And Aquino says to me, next time you're in Anaheim, call me and I will give you the password so you can get into 33. And it was just there. And if you are a high up level of the occult community, there's a room for you that you go and celebrate your magical identity. And I don't know if you have to eat a small cube of child's flesh when you walk in to prove that you belong there. I mean, I didn't realize how dark and untoward all of that was. Same with Magic Castle, by the way, in Los Angeles. It's full of occultists practicing magicians and stuff. But yeah, I have to say I have had interactions with one of the arch figures in certainly not white magic, and he couldn't stop talking about how much he loved Disney and Disneyland.
That's scary. I've covered Aquino, though, in a piece that I wrote about who is Hillary Rodham Clinton and just kind of really got into his dark past. So that's pretty wild to hear.
He was the one that just with a simple discordant tone, sublevel, you could prevent any productive talks from taking place in the diplomat. Like, his magic was not good or constructive. I think his doctor understood who he was. Like, once you start looking into him, good God. And you know what else? Oprah protected him. Oprah did to him what Fox did to James Alefantis. Like, that's probably how she knew to turn her house blue and not get her house burned up in Maui. I don't know. I guess it's not news about her, but there is a whole world out there that I just would have preferred to remain oblivious to. My friend Lon is when he was the outer head of the OTO, I'd go with him to the Masonic headquarters, and we would go and officiate. He would travel and literally start up new OTO lodges. And man, some of the people I met who would just use weapon.
Sorry to cut you off. It's just, is that something you found over your life with the Magical Egypt series, that you unfortunately attracted some folks who were more attracted to the dark magic aspects?
Yeah, man, characters. It's a joke that I say, but it's not a joke. Schizophrenic people love me. Insane schizophrenic people love me. I'm sure if it were tabulated, I'm hundreds of mass murderers that love magical. I don't know what it is about the call of Cthulhu that comes from this show, but man, you would not believe some of the mixed bag of fruit of the human race that are obsessed with me. Not me, but obsessed with the show. They'd be much less excited about me, I'm sure.
Wow, that's crazy. So if you're willing, if you'd kind of share a little bit for folks who maybe don't know who Michael Aquino is and his relationship to Disney. And if you don't want to go there, we can go to something else.
I would never stand up to be a spokesperson to describe anybody. You tell me, what do you know about him?
Yeah, so my understanding is that, like you said, he was the head of the Temple of Set, but he was also concurrently a high-ranking intelligence official.
He was the head of TSA when he died. You know that? He was the head of the TSA. I didn't even realize that until after he died.
I had no idea. That's insane. I mean, it's crazy.
The country that you live in. We haven't talked about Colorado yet, but yeah, I got the fuck out of there when the place turned dark in about 2008. But yeah, that's your place you live in. Is a giant temple of Set. Not Colorado. It's the states, United States, the new configuration under the military control.
Well, and that's what I was going to say to you as we were talking about the phallus of Osiris. Like, who's to say, is there something in the freaking thing in DC? Like, that obviously is representative of something pretty dark.
Well, the owl. They prefer Moloch, and the owl, this is a minefield that we shouldn't enter, but...
we're this far down the rabbit hole. Come on.
When you trace the cultures back, there are certain cultures. There are cultures traditionally who loved to sacrifice children. And a lot of the story of Moses burning the golden calf and all that, the Baal Moloch traditions involved sacrifice. And those statues, the reason that they had the gold hands that held out, or the little door that opened in their stomach where there's a cauldron, is specifically for the sacrifice of children. At some point, when the intelligence community took over America, it seems like that specific strain of bad manipulative occultism took over as well. And that's the paradigm we live under. So we're prevented from it because of the rules of powerology. The Asuras are keeping the Devas are keeping the Asuras from even understanding there is magic while they're using magic on us. And so anyway, this gentleman, Aquino, became notorious. Well, the Sandy Hook school stuff, that there was Sandy Hook. No, it wasn't Sandy Hook. I forget the name of the daycare center.
No, you're right. It's Presidio Air Force Base, I think.
So we know Presidio, like Presidio Park, San Francisco. Yeah, so the Presidio daycare center was right by the military installation where this gentleman lived. I don't even want to so toward. But anyway, let's just say this guy used magic in a very bad way. He used magic in a disruptive way. And he also, part of that bad tradition of magic is sometimes you use innocence, sometimes you do blood magic, and sometimes, there's a giant world market for adrenochrome and this thing that you extract from people under incredible amounts of pain and stress that gives the blood a hallucinogenic property. A very decadent, horrible thing. I'm not endorsing it. I'm not saying I've done it, but anyway, there's a bit of that culture, though. Accusations of being involved in that culture swirling around this particular gentleman. And then he developed some minor thing that was cancer, but every surgical procedure that he went in for that should have been a small surgical thing, he ended up losing an organ, he lost an eye, and they were literally taking him apart piece by piece. And it seems as though his doctor might have understood who he was and was doing medical retribution on him. This is a super dark avenue to go down, but that's why I'm just saying he came to a pretty sticky end that in itself is kind of an interesting morality play or short story, if it is even true, which you have no reason to believe anything I say is true, so let's not belabor this.
No, who knows, but it is interesting. And like I said for the audience, I covered his story pretty in depth in the essay about who is Hillary Rodham Clinton. So check that episode out if you really want to hear all the gory details. And look, and I don't mean to dwell on that kind of stuff, but I do think it's important for us, if we are to avoid that darker future you talked about, to understand when we talk about corruption in the intelligence agencies and with these elites and with these celebrities, right? We're not talking about these guys who are diddling, hot young girls that want to be famous. These people are into some really dark stuff, and we just have to face that reality. And you talked about in Heka, you talk about the historic occult practice of cannibalism. Meanwhile, you fast forward to the present day, and you talked about, or rather, you alluded to the Pizzagate releases and what we learned about Marina Abramovich and John Podesta. Again, folks, if you aren't familiar with what Pizzagate was really about, what the 2016 WikiLeaks of Pizzagate and John Podesta's emails were really about, please go do research. It's important to understand what's really been going on.
There's a hack, that new word hack in our culture, hack. It just occurred to me while you were talking that there's hacks, there's reality hacks, and that a preponderance of the world's most intelligent people have gravitated towards this way of hacking the consciousness of the universe. And for whatever reason, a lot of those people are so smart that they're in that niche beyond good and evil thing. Because Aquino is crazy smart, super charming, like any spider, I'm sure, that gets somebody into his so many of the really important people in magical Egypt were either, I don't want to say devotees, but at some point in their life, and uniformly all of them are trying to cover up their Church of Set tattoo and stuff. But there was a time in Hollywood, David Lynch, there's a story David Lynch tells. And the point, just to finish the idea, those were incredibly powerful, prevalent ideas in the 70s in Los Angeles, which ended up feeding culture for America for the next 30 years. And there's this seed, there's this snake in the soil there that there's legitimate magic tradition, but then there's this perversion of magic. Oh, there's a cool John West story I wanted to tell you. John hates magic, hates the idea of magic. He's not crazy about tantra. It took me years. He knows everything about it, but it took me years to get him to address it. John I was sitting in the Valley of Kings one day with John, super hot. We're about to have a heat stroke, and we're just standing there trying to live. And I just threw my camera on like we do whenever we're bored. And I just, riff on Valley of the Kings and the idea of preserving bodies. And he said this thing that I absolutely didn't expect. It's a perversion of nature. He said it's wrong. It's not quite Heka. There's a reason that there's an order to things. And just like you can pervert the natural order of having sex with people your own age, and then there's a kind of moral dispersion cast on people who don't go with the laws of nature, there was something disingenuous and kind of sickly. William Burroughs said this too. Isn't there something vaguely cowardice about a magician who can't solve his problems face to face? He has to resort to spells and cowardly spells in the shadows. So John said something like that, and I did not expect to hear him say something like that about Egypt, that a fundamental flaw that they had is that a certain period in the culture, they all head towards that Michael Aquino style decadence where you've learned. And because like we know how to staple a stomach, it doesn't mean you should. We know how to split the atoms. It doesn't mean something good is going to come from it. There's a funny thing about humanity and the cargo cult mentality that we have, that just because you can do something, there's always somebody out there that says, oh my God, we have to do it before they do it. And there's lots of things that we can do that we shouldn't do. And I was really surprised that John found the magic of messing with the machine. So the Vedas is it's an analysis of the reincarnation process like an impartial clockwork mechanism. But then somebody learned that if you die and you keep a little piece of chewed up gum in your pocket as you go through the mechanism, you can put a piece of gum or you can put your comb in this thing. It's like when you go to a theater as a kid and you leave and you put your comb in the door so the back door doesn't close all the way so your friends can get in for free. You're cheating. It's disingenuous. And you might very well be fucking up an incredibly complicated mechanism. I have a really good friend, Rick Strassman, the DMT guy. Rick Strassman did all this DMT work, and these Buddhists, Rick's a staunch Buddhist. He just wrote a good book, too, if you want to read an interesting book of fiction. Rick Strassman wrote a fiction book that he'd be very happy if more people read. The Buddhists came to him and said, you are fucking with machinery of incarnation. You're throwing people hundreds of lives into future incarnations. Like when somebody is suddenly like, I was living in a hyper-intelligent bee community, or I was an intelligent cactus. They're like, you're messing with an incredibly delicate mechanism that you don't understand, and you're doing it like a little monkey with a stick is in a china shop saying, listen to the sound that all these glasses make when I break them with my stick. And so it's a cautionary tale that as much as I'm hesitant to talk about Michael Aquino or anything like that, it is necessary to understand that just because the Egyptians did something doesn't mean it's right or good. And there are kinds of magic that are really more hacks that are like having your stomach removed to lose weight. It's not. And this is the difference between Eastern and Western thinking, is that Eastern thinking, you only do something if it works in harmony with the mechanism. Whereas the West, in our way of thinking, is that the mechanism is an idiot.
Well, and I think for me, I think about it as like similar to those cycles of time you were talking about earlier. You also see the cycles of the lighter side of divine magic and the darker side as well, right? Where they kind of overpower. You look at the Greeks as well, same kind of thing, right? You have the Eleusinian mysteries and you have, Bacchanalia. And it's just, there's always this counterbalance.
So knowing now the cargo cult model, you look at the Greeks. The Greeks created a cargo cult of Egypt. In some cases, they kept the outer form, didn't understand the inner mechanism. They concretized, they legitimized, they took this flying bird and turned it into a bird of stone. Egypt may have been cargo culting some of its stuff from the very most ancient Asia. So this brings me back to the thing I was talking about originally of looking it through the keyhole versus walking in the door. At no point has anyone ever prevented you from picking up a book of Taoist folk magic. And that all of those people, all of the West, all of the modern commenters on magic, if they don't come from an East, or if they don't acknowledge that this is the unmuddied, pure, clear river that all this stuff comes from, they're idiots. Look, they're not idiots. They're well-intentioned people looking through a keyhole and pretending that they're experts in what's in the room. And I'm not in any way saying that I'm an expert in any of this. I've just happened to notice that there's this door. Everyone's peeking through the keyhole, but the door is not locked. You can just walk in the fucking room, and look at it for yourself, except that it requires a little bit of effort and you have to do some education. The number one deterrent for anything is that You got to go 30 days without sex. You got to not eat meat or drink alcohol and no sugar. And don't be mad. Don't be mean to people for 30 days. And that's all you have to do. And that's enough to keep most people from ever wanting to participate in this. But then if you do, the rewards are everything that we come to love about the potential of magic anyway. But it's all right there. I'm sorry to be obnoxious, and I don't want to I'm not trying to wedge that in there, except that this is just one of the more important ideas that I've had like this, that I've been trying to put together this massive grand puzzle in my head based on these little fragments. And I come along and somebody's got like a little handkerchief with the whole thing. And it's like, oh yeah, I have this. I got it in a lunchbox. I got it in my Happy Meal in Taoist China. It's all there, 100% complete, working in situ, a working model. And yet we're deferring to these 18th century people like Dion Fortune and Blavatsky, who tiny little fragments of things they've been able to tell, not even aware of how simple it was to get the pure, unadulterated model. And it's just really not racism, but egotism of the West to think that we're so smart that there's no reason to look into other cultures, certainly no reason to learn a whole other language just so you can look at this book of truth. So I apologize for all my answers taking so long, but you're asking such and deep questions. I feel like I should give you full answers.
I love it. And I think that, again, as we're talking about the influence of intelligence on Egyptology, and I think just, for academia more broadly, right? Like even when you think about Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech, right? Even that nomenclature is a bit of a limited hangout as to what he's really talking about, right? Because doesn't he say something about a scientific, technological elite? And they try to divert your attention away from that part of it.
You should. The fact that you're asking these questions, Jordan, I'm going to tell you this thing. When I first started talking about this, my emails went down, and I think several different countries put bugs in my email system. It took me a month to recover from when I first started talking about this. Do me and you a favor. Get this book. You can get it on Kindle and just listen to it. But this thing tells you everything you need to know about these questions you're asking. Why do we not know this? How come this is such obscured information? How come every time we start making inroads, they change it just enough to divert us from that? This apparently is the most empowering evolutionary knowledge that a person can have, and that we are just like a cow doesn't need to understand much to smell where the grass is. We're gravitating to this, and the smarter you are and the less intellectually fucked up you got in school, the more your compass is going to point towards this stuff. And it wasn't until I, first of all, heard the story of the Devas and the Suras, but then had it made real to me through powerology, that everything makes sense, and that all of the seeming discrepancies and all the madnesses of the way the world is constructed, it's not mad at all. It's brilliant. It's just as brilliant as a fence to keep the chickens in and keep all the grain in the same room as the farmer.
Yeah. What do you think about Atlantis and its relationship to ancient Egypt? Like, were they one and the same, or how did they relate?
This is a really good book. If you're asking this question, Peter Kingsley, In the Dark Places of Magic. In the Dark Places of Wisdom, it's called. He talks about how Plato short-circuited our history by, first of all, injecting himself into the line of great thinkers, which is a great PR plan. But also he cut out the influence of Eastern thinkers and really truncated the West into this narcissistic gazing into the mirror and completely closing your ears to the actual source of the wisdom. And so that happened again in the example you're asking. Tell me again, ask me the question again.
What's the relationship between Atlantis and Egypt?
So a lot of our tradition, our lineage of wisdom traditions have been selectively hopped over certain things so that we can have this robust, narcissistic, self-affirming model of consciousness and magic and esotericism. But once again, like the missing phallus as a figurative idea, there is the key that actually turns it on that is very carefully avoided in Western esoteric traditions. So Greeks, the Romans, even Pythagoras had a vague shadow of an understanding of the actual learning that he was getting. And I also suspect, I literally talk to Brad about this damn near every day. Did they even know what they were doing? How could they have looked in and seen those complex mechanisms? Did they even know? And I, of course, think they did, but Brad might kind of thinks something other than that, I don't really understand. Or in that idea that something really much more intelligent than us came down and showed us these things about ourselves, and then we cargo culted them into making them statues and gods when they're really trying to say, here's your radio to connect you to the rest of the cosmos. Call us when you're smart enough and you want to be galactic spacefarers. And we took this information and reduced it to statues and gods in that cargo cult kind of way. It's kind of funny. Very Stanley Kubrick, like the monkeys and the monolith. There's something about us and magic that is like the monkeys and the monolith. I find that ironically hilarious. I'm aware that I'm diverting from actually answering any of your questions because of...
No worries. So the question was about Atlantis and the relationship of Egypt to Atlantis.
If you look at this from the model, Atlantis is like a catchword. Let's go through the three possible meanings of Atlantis. There's a catchphrase that was an era that Atlantis just means, if you substitute that word Atlantis for the missing chapter or chapters, possibly 4 entire rises and falls of humanity in the past, the aggregate leftovers from all of those old civilizations that for whatever reason we're not supposed to know about, so the government actively denies and says you're not seeing those. Atlantis is a great word for physical evidence, technological evidence, as well as ruins. Thinking, a lot of Masonic words mean these things from so long ago. The art that seems to have this, what is 1,000 years ahead of us in terms of biological knowledge, like we still don't understand what consciousness is. We still don't understand what the brain does. I and Brad found these schematics in the art that indicate that at some point they absolutely knew the origins of consciousness. They absolutely knew the functions of all the brain. That's Atlantis. That is a remnant of Atlantis. I don't think that Atlantis as the home of Poseidon, where everyone was underwater, and that idea that there was in Plato's story, there was an island and they were too smart and they misused the technology and they got perverse in their social structure and in their hierarchy again. That was Plato doing this amazing thing. It was an allegory. And he wrote it as an allegory, but it was one of those hush-hush things like it is now, that there's knowledge that's privileged, that is the privilege of the elite, that is not meant for us peons. That is, there's been lots of different previous cultures. And so Atlantis may have been an actual place, and it may have been a city that represented the highest pinnacle of civilization before we were brought down by, Randall Carlson thinks it's a comet. We're seeing how even the social justice destroyed our country. It wasn't a comet. It wasn't anything. It could have destroyed the superstructure of Western intellectual pursuit. We don't need earthquakes. We don't need alien intervention. Just human shittiness is enough to destroy a culture sometimes. And aggressive idiocy, cancerous aggressive idiocy. Name of my new band, Cancerous Aggressive Idiocy. Anyway, so Atlantis, it's a hugely, you're really hitting them out of the park with these questions. It's a hugely loaded question. And clearly there's evidence of Atlantis if you use Atlantis as this catch-all for all of the civilizations that happened that Western society doesn't want to know about, that are clearly. So Pythagoras proved all of music. Do you play music, by the way? Are you a musician?
Musician in training.
I should turn and show you. I've got my whole music studio right here. I told you that already. I have, it's one of my funnest things about documentary making is I'm too fat now and my hair's falling out. I can't get up and rock out anymore. I just look ridiculous, but I can do soundtrack all day long. Plus I don't like people looking at me. Isn't that a weird thing if you're a musician that you don't like people looking at you? I'll be like Buckethead or one of those people that obscures my... Yeah, kidding, man. I'm constantly having my commitment to marital fidelity tested. Every time I pick up the guitar, I can get laid with a guitar solo. It's not good. It's not good for marriage, but I love that. But anyway, completely pointless diversion. I have so much fun writing music now. But if you I was going to use music as a metaphor, and then I lost it again. What were we talking about?
Oh, wait. And one thing I wanted to ask you about that. You mentioned you and Brad found a map of consciousness, right? Let's talk about that. Where is this map?
Okay, so the image of the cross. So did you get the schematics that I sent over before our talk? It might have been in your spam. I sent you over these one sheets that show every one of the schematics. So there's this super complicated schematics of your diencephalon from the 3 classic views. There's this incredibly powerful, important symbol and idea in Egypt called the crossover. So all the pharaohs are buried with their arms crossed. Your brain crosses over, your optic nerves cross over, so your right hemisphere sees what your left hemisphere all that stuff. So there's incredibly sophisticated schematics of the wetware. We call it the actual meat, your brain and everything, that shows where, and because it's portrayed as a god, there's ways that you can associate legend with what the god does, who the god has relationships with. And so the sculptures show you the physicality of the parts of the brain that produce consciousness, which only now we're starting to verify, but from the most 3-year-old perspective, we're just barely starting to understand. But Egypt doesn't stop at mapping the physical sources of consciousness. It goes on to create these structures of consciousness itself. So the very most simple one is this statue called Horus and Set. It's called the reconciling element. So there's a statue of the pharaoh in the middle. Horus is on one side and Set's on the other side. And they're both literally pointing to his hemisphere. So one side's this way, one side's this way. And it's as if you understand who Horus is and what his traits are. He's volatile, he's raising, he's a bird, he's whatever. And then Set is this conglomerate animal that's like your id and your the urge to kill, your bloodlust and all that stuff. And so all the physical things that pull you down, or the literalization, the cargo culting of things, is Set. Set is, Aquino didn't know this. I talked to him for months trying to get this out of him, and he finally admitted he had no idea about this. But Set isn't a dog. He looks like an anteater, but he's a composite animal. He's got even kangaroo ears, there's a whole conversation about Egyptians went to Australia, and they know a lot about Australia. So anyway, the Set is a conglomeration animal. Anyway, this statue, Horus and Set, blessing the king, is one of the first simplest. Oh, good. Excellent. So spend some time with those. Those are huge. Those are world-changing, and nobody in Egyptology, it's embarrassing to me that I have to keep doing the Egyptologist's job for them. Nobody in Egyptology knows that. Nobody's seen that. That's a fucking Nobel.
Wow, this is so cool. Yeah, I remember this. I think it was season 2, and it just absolutely blew my mind. So I'll share those pictures with the audience on my Substack.
I'm doing a feature film that's going to be on the indie film circuit that's just that discovery as a historical art study. So I'll take it out of the New Age. Just present this as, did you know that the ancients knew the structure of the brain? So that's my new feature film. It's going to be based on those. It's groundbreaking. Every day I call Brad and say, clear a place on your fireplace for the fucking Nobel Prize we're going to win when somebody finally understands what we've discovered. And I'll probably be long dead by then.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I'm glad you said that, because I remember when I watched it, I was like, man, this is such important knowledge. Sounds like, I mean, I get it. Like, is it frustrating for you over the years recognizing what you found and how so few others recognize its importance?
Either die of cancer from being angry about it, or you become Kurt Vonnegut and you're like, this is the funniest fucking thing I've ever seen. Humans are the ultimate. And all you can do is not be attached. I never stop. I'm going to make a feature film. I'm going to keep shoving this down people's throats until something happens. It's very smart, and I'm very careful about who I choose. I do about one of these interviews a year, so very seldom does somebody break through to my inner sanctum that I want to talk to. But I need to tell this to people like you, because I'm not going to be around forever. There's a funny little aside. Did you ever see that movie Don't Look Up? It's about 2 years old now. Comet coming at us, and they go to the president going, I have something really important to tell you. And the president's like, is it as important as these people that are campaigning for nail polish? I don't think so. Is it as important as rubber tree plants? And yeah, it fucking is. But try and say, I have something important in humanity changing in a world where that's all. Every fucking podcaster has some humanity changing bit of information. Forgive my potty mouth, by the way. I have to have a sense of humor about it, but I'm not going to stop, and I have to keep finding different venues to push this, because sooner or later somebody's going to get it. Right now I'm working with this brilliant kid named Corbin. He's the PR kid that just did Dr. Nell's, the indoctrinated brain. Dr. Nell's just did this great run talking about how our brains were physically changed by the COVID propaganda. That kid got Dr. Nell's on Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson and blah, blah, blah. I'm publishing a book. I'm doing a feature film, and I'm also doing all these great interactive rooms in Unreal Engine to deliver the same thing as an interactive narrative. But YouTube, and especially us, we're the most strangled page on YouTube for all of these reasons, powerology and stuff. We've got a strangulation on me where if I publish something about how to stick a tennis shoe up your ass, I'll get 100,000 views. But if I publish this artwork, the most important apple cart upsetting thing there is, I'll get 113 views. That there's an actual strangulation on my ability to speak to the public via public channels. But the indie film circuit has a much different censorship mechanism, and they kind of root for the underdog in those cases. And then publishing is a completely different thing that Amazon might refuse to publish my book because they'll find something contentious about it. But feature films, for some reason. And then the other thing is I'm working with Dr. Nels on Rupert Sheldrake, one of my best friends, Rupert Sheldrake, smartest man in the world. I've got a couple of incredibly smart.
Oh, wow, that's great. Yeah, I didn't know you guys were friends.
I love that guy. And his son, the lady killer that's going to be a new genius. His son is already addressing scientific councils.
Yeah,
Choosing these stones to walk across the river that are stones that can't slip. So we're building a bridge where I'm going to come back in like Solomon with his ring to dominate the demons. If you get the right authorities high enough up on the chain to say, yeah, it's absolutely right, then all the midwits that didn't want to see it, like, oh, Sheldrake says it, maybe I'll look into it. And so we're working that angle. First, I went, as is my wont, I made a Twilight Zone episode and a surrealist weirdness, a hallucinogenic experience is what my goal for Magical Egypt was. Nobody ever asked for that, by the way. Nobody commissioned it. Nobody ever paid me anything. I think I'm down about $700,000 all told for having got involved with Magical Egypt. But I wouldn't change it for the world, wouldn't change anything, and we do fine. I mean, we do really good, and everywhere we go, the universe takes care of us in the most amazing way. Plus, in Thailand now, I'm genuinely believe that Venice and I died in a car wreck a couple of years ago, and I'm just in this interactive heaven where everything I want just happens. I can drink all I want, and the only thing that happens, look at this bad boy, they don't just pass those out. They don't just hand those out willy-nilly. You got to work for years to get one of those. 10,000 bottles of tequila right there. Anyway, no, aside from my body falling apart, I have to say, just to cut to the end of this, I'm so, at the end of this particular diatribe, you are really like medicine for me, hearing that there's and maybe you're a one-off, maybe you're representative of a new hope in this generation, that the fact that you have been around media long enough to understand that it's just a fucking lie box, castle made of lies, broadcast of lies, wallpaper of lies, and they're wallpapering the inside of your head with those lies if you let them in. And you see right through it. You were just born with this, like the genius of nature produced a new generation that was impervious to bullshit. And now you're like, well, if that's all wrong, what's true? And then you look around and you see something like the stupid little thing that I've held up, and you're like, okay, I'll spend some more time paying attention to that. And then you're going to pull it to a place that's smarter and more reality-based than I ever did. And I came at it through the art. There's an equal access to it through music and then semiotics and the way the brain works. Ian McGilchrist is right in there with the brain really is built for symbols. Brain's built to work in symbols. And the fact that we've been taking off of that is like we've been taking off the intellectual gold standard. So we're going to return in that way. But you are really representing what may be the thing that flips us into the next, at least, what are we, Copper Age or Stone Age? We'll get back up into the Copper Ages because of young people like yourselves, your moral compass set properly.
I hope so. Well, and look, I definitely bought the propaganda for the first 31 years of my life. And then I had the fortune of having that awakening I mentioned earlier from Greer's documentary. And then, I was fortunate enough to grow up in this world, like you said, where the information's out there, right? As Dr. Joe Dispenza always says, like, in the age of information, ignorance is a choice. And so, once you start following these threads of truth, they're all there.
It has been so much fun. In the meantime, the only thing you can think of is actually true. And if you start, have you done any kundalini work or any tantra or any body work?
Oh, it's funny you say that. I'm a practitioner of transcendental meditation, but that's all very simple. No breath work involved. But I am I'm going actually to Dr. Joe's retreat this summer here in Denver.
There's a name I'll tell you that you may or may not be interested in. Take this with a grain of salt. Mantak Chia. The simplest protocol in the world. Try and go 30 days without orgasm. And I'm not going to say anything, just do and see what happens to your meditation. And that is the key that opens the door, at least gets you out of the fog of war of ordinary thought, and suddenly is like a diamond, and then your meditation starts working, and then you find that in your meditation room there's a little door that you can walk back into the hypnotic space and join with the undifferentiated consciousness. But here's the thing I was going to say. There's so many things that we learned in our childhood that seem simple and naive, and being kind to others, being gracious, not letting yourself get pulled into arguments, not being mean, is the most selfish thing you can possibly do. If you're accumulating energy, and especially if you're building this soul through semen retention, it's like a little soup. And every time you get mad, every time you're mean, it's like a bug or a frog jumps into your soup. So you're not being kind so that you're a pussy or so that you're a nice guy, you're trying to get laid. Your magnetic field and the purity and the intensity of your soul, and not soul, a stupid word, nobody knows what soul or spirit is, but there's this intangible thing about you that's either like a lamp that goes in all directions, but you can focus it like a laser, and that's your consciousness, your mind. That thing, there is a little baby or a little Shiva that you grow, and it can grow very big and powerful until the day that you have a margarita, and then it dies, and you start over again. It can grow really powerful, and you get mad at your wife, and you explode, and then it pops, and you have to start over again. Kindness and compassion not only is just entirely missing from the West right now, but it's the most selfish activity that you can practice. And then never stop learning. You start dying of Alzheimer's the minute that you stop learning new things. And follow your heart like you're doing. You are such an avatar of everything that people should be doing. You find a truth, and that's like the sun that the flower grows towards, and that's real living. You're an actual human. You've gotten up off your feet like a fucking weevil in the mud like most people, and you're walking around. You're walking around on your own.
You're walking around, baby. Well, hey, man, I don't want to fall into that 10,000-year dark pit of despair you were describing earlier, you know.
I am drinking. I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that I'm not around for that. I'm throwing all caution to the wind and living it up, living it the fuck up, my friend, because I don't want to see, I don't want to see what's going to happen. I'll watch it from my new vantage point as a 3-year-old girl.
Well, Chance, thanks again for doing this. This was so much fun.
All right, my friend. Well, I'm always around, and you know how to get a hold of me. So if you want to do this more, I find after like my third interview, I start actually getting to the point of things. I don't know. We just came back from Vegas. My brain.
Yeah, I would love to do this again sometime. That was so great.
And we have to have a whole conversation about music. Well, I want to do an album of Magical Egypt collaboration, because literally everyone in Magical Egypt, almost everybody, is a graphic designer plus a musician, like some kind of visual artist plus musician. So it just occurred to me we should be doing albums of musical duets. So whenever you want to, you and I, maybe, we're going to do a duet.
Yeah, I'd love to be involved in that. And yeah, maybe after season 4 comes out, that'd be a good time to circle back up and do another interview.
I'm going to be buried in cement until the day that happens. I'm doing feature film, book, and Heka. Venice is mostly doing Heka, but I'm doing all the animations, and I'm having so much fun with that. So I'm probably going to write the music and do the animations, and I help with things. I've got a wicked camera. I don't know if you can see my camera. I got a great film camera that I'm just coming on to. So the new feature film is actually shot on film, and man, it looks so good. But anyway, so I'm always around. Feel free to give me a call whenever you want, or let's keep talking by email, and I'll let you know as the show develops. It needs to happen pretty quick, because Denise made a lot of crazy promises about delivery dates and whatnot. So you'll be seeing them. They're going to come firing out of here sooner or later.
Amazing. All right, well, thanks, Chance. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. This episode continues with the outro in episode 81, How Did the Egyptians Know Consciousness? In it, I'll dive into Chance's revelations from Season 2 of Magical Egypt, the knowledge of consciousness embedded within the sacred art of Egypt. Until then, Merry Christmas to you all. We honor this day in love and gratitude to the birth of Jesus Christ. His divine spark provided the life and lessons to serve as a blueprint for the salvation of humanity. Love and gratitude to all of you who celebrate today as an opportunity to worship God, to restore the sanctity of the family, and to your community. To those who celebrate today as Saturnalia, we reject your deceptions. The people of humanity do not consent to any of your acts of evil or ceremonial magic. We call upon Archangel Michael to serve as a protector of the innocent on this day. Prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than